Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto's father was Hephaestus, granting him the power to forge divine ninja tools? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Spark and the Anvil. The air in the forge was thick enough to drink, tasting of ozone, coal smoke, and the sharp, clean scent of quenching steel. It was a subterranean pocket of heat and life carved out beneath the crumbling stone of the old Uzumaki shrine on the far edge of Konoha. This was Naruto's church, his sanctuary. The rhythmic, percussive clang of his hammer against glowing metal was the only sermon he needed. Clang, clang, thump. The sounds echoed in a steady, hypnotic beat. Each strike was a conversation. The hammer was his voice, the steel his willing listener. He wasn't just beating the metal into submission, he was persuading it, coaxing it toward its true form. Sweat dripped from his brow, sizzling as it hit the forge's hearth, the steam rising to join the haze that clung to the stone ceiling. He held the half-formed weapon up with a pair of soot-blackened tongs, his eyes, a blue as fierce as the gas flame he used for precision work, scanning the lines of the steel. It was a trench knife. One of a pair. The design was practical, brutal, with a D-shaped guard that protected the knuckles. But it was the metal itself that was extraordinary. It was his own blend. Folded over 1,000 times with slivers of chakra-conductive meteorite he'd spent a year tracking down. Most smiths would have called it impossible to work. The celestial metal resisted shaping, fought against the heat, and would shatter under the hammer of a lesser craftsman. For Naruto, it felt like a living thing, a stubborn animal he was taming. In his blood, he felt the echo of his father's power, the fire of a god's own forge. He didn't know the name Hephaestus. He only knew the fire in his soul demanded an outlet, and that outlet was creation. The nine-tailed fox sealed within him was a furnace of raw, chaotic energy. His divine heritage was the skill that could shape it, contain it, and give it purpose beyond destruction. He slid the glowing blade into a trough of specially prepared oil. The quench was violent. The oil erupted in a flash of yellow flame, a roaring hiss that filled the small chamber. He held it steady, his arm taut, feeling the vibrations as the STEL's internal structure screamed and realigned itself, hardening into something that could cut through the very fabric of jutsu. He could feel the weapon's nascent spirit, a faint hum of energy that resonated with the power in his own chakra coils. A deep, resonant tremor shook the forge, not from his work, but from the world above. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. A low roar, distant yet familiar, reached him. The crowd. He'd lost track of time again. "Damn it," he muttered, his voice a low rasp. He pulled the finished knife from the oil, its surface now a non-reflective, matte black. He laid it beside its twin on a worn leather sheet, the pair of them seeming to drink the light from the room. They were perfect, balanced, deadly, and alive with a power no one else in this world could replicate. He ran a hand through his blonde hair, leaving a streak of soot. The final match of the Chunin exams. His match. Against Neji Hyuga. He was supposed to be in the arena, listening to some proctor drone on about rules. Instead, he'd been answering a more urgent call. He strapped the twin blades to the small of his back, the leather sheaths hugging his body. He pulled on a simple black jacket over his mesh armor. The familiar orange jumpsuit he sometimes wore for misdirection left folded in a corner. It was a caricature, a mask to make people underestimate him. Today, there was no room for masks. He placed a hand on the stone wall of the forge, and a complex array of seals, intricately carved into the rock, glowed with a faint blue light. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel leading upwards. The air that rushed in was cool, carrying the scent of dust and tension. Without a backward glance at the hearthfire that never truly went out, he sprinted into the darkness. The roar of the crowd grew louder as he ascended, the tunnel opening behind a loose panel in one of the arena's lower corridors. He slipped out, adjusting his eyes to the bright daylight filtering through the arches. He could feel the stares of the other genin as he walked toward the entrance to the stadium floor. They saw the same dead last, the loudmouthed idiot from the academy. They didn't see the soot under his fingernails or the faint smell of the forge clinging to his clothes. They couldn't feel the low thrum of the divine tools resting against his spine. As he stepped out onto the sun-drenched field, a wave of noise washed over him. He ignored it, his eyes finding his opponent. Neji Hyuga stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, his arms crossed, his pale eyes holding an expression of serene arrogance. He looked like a marble statue, flawless and untouchable. "You're late, Genma," the proctor said around the senbon he chewed. "Ready to forfeit. Wouldn't miss this," Naruto said, his voice calm, carrying easily in the suddenly quiet stadium. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the weight of his new creations. They felt like a part of him already. Neji's lip curled in a faint sneer. "So the failure deigns to appear. You should have saved yourself the humiliation. Your fate was sealed the moment you were chosen as my opponent. It is inescapable." Naruto just smiled, a small, confident quirk of his lips. He didn't need to trade barbs. The argument would be settled with steel, not words. "Let's get on with it." The proctor shrugged and leapt back. "Begin." The fight started not with a bang, but with a chilling stillness. Neji settled into the classic gentle fist stance, his Byakugan eyes flaring to life, the veins around his temples bulging. He could see everything. Naruto's chakra network, the massive, turbulent sea of the Kyuubi's power swirling in his gut, and the 3,601 Tenketsu points he intended to systematically shut down. "Your eyes see a lot," Naruto said, his hands staying loose at his sides. "But you only see the surface. You see pipes, but you don't understand the water flowing through them." Quote, "Your pathetic philosophy is meaningless against a superior power," Neji replied, and then he moved. He was a blur, a white phantom gliding across the dirt. He wasn't aiming for a vital point, not yet. This was a demonstration. 8 trigrams, 2 palms. 4 palms. 8 palms. His strikes were like a flurry of angry hornets, precise and inescapable. Naruto didn't try to block them head-on. He moved, his footwork surprisingly fluid. He wasn't as graceful as Neji, but he was more grounded, more explosive. He deflected the palm strikes with the back of his forearms, letting the force slide past him. Still, a few strikes landed, and a jolt of numbing pain shot through his shoulder, his chakra flow sputtering in that spot. Neji was as good as his reputation claimed. The crowd murmured. From the stands, Sasuke Uchiha watched with narrowed eyes. This was the Naruto he knew, unrefined, taking hits, relying on stamina and raw power. It was predictable, it was pathetic. Hinata, seated with her team, clenched her fists. Her knuckles white, her own Byakugan was active, and she watched in silent anguish as Neji began to disable her friend, her teammate, her secret inspiration. But as she focused, she saw something else. Naruto's chakra, while momentarily disrupted by Neji's strikes, wasn't just sputtering. It was coiling. The Kyuubi's red energy was a storm, as always, but beneath it, Hinata could perceive another layer of power, something she'd never seen before in anyone else. It was a brilliant, golden light, steady and intense, like a star hidden behind violent red clouds. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat. On the field, Naruto stumbled back, a grimace on his face. Neji pressed his advantage. "It is over. Your dream of becoming Hokage is a childish fantasy. A failure will always be a failure. That is your destiny." He lunged, his hand aimed like a spear at Naruto's heart. This would be the finishing blow. And then Naruto's hands moved. They were a blur, reaching for the small of his back. 2 sharp shing sounds cut through the air as he drew his new trench knives. They were matte black, absorbing the sunlight, giving off no reflection. In his grip, they looked less like weapons and more like extensions of his hands. Neji's eyes widened slightly, but his attack didn't falter. A blade was useless against the gentle fist's ability to strike through any guard. His palm was inches from Naruto's chest when Naruto moved the knives to intercept. He didn't block in the traditional sense. He crossed the blades in front of him, and just as Neji's chakra-infused palm was about to make contact, Naruto channeled his own chakra into the weapons. For a split second, a wave of shimmering, emerald green energy erupted from the steel, his wind nature, amplified 100-fold. It wasn't a cutting attack. It was a concussive, omnidirectional burst of pure force. Boom. The impact was immense. Neji was thrown backward as if hit by a battering ram, his perfectly controlled form shattered. He tumbled across the arena floor, kicking up a cloud of dust. The crowd gasped. Neji landed on his feet, his composure cracked for the first time. He stared at his hand, which tingled with a painful numbness. The chakra he had projected had been annihilated. Thrown back at him. What was that? Naruto didn't answer. He just spun the knives in his hands, settling into a low, predatory crouch. The golden energy within him, the energy Hinata could see, was now flowing freely, swirling down his arms and into the dark metal of the blades, which seemed to hum with a low, resonant power. Destiny, Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear, as just an excuse for people who are too afraid to build their own future. Let me show you, he charged. The entire dynamic of the fight shifted. Naruto was no longer on the defensive. He was the aggressor, a whirlwind of black steel and focused intent. He didn't fight like a traditional shinobi. He moved like a brawler, a hunter. Using the D-guards of his knives to block and punch, the blades to slash and control space. Neji, for all his genius, was flustered. His gentle fist required precise, close-quarters strikes. But, every time he tried to get inside Naruto's guard, one of those black blades was there, ready to unleash another devastating pulse of wind chakra. He was forced to rely on his rotation, spinning like a top to deflect the attacks. But it was a defensive measure, and it was costing him chakra. You think those toys can defeat me? Neji snarled, his frustration mounting. Your chakra points are still damaged. You are fighting on borrowed time. Who said I needed them? Naruto replied, and then he did something that defied all logic of the gentle fist style. He deliberately allowed Neji to strike his arm. As Neji's palm connected, Naruto didn't try to block. Instead, he clamped down, trapping Neji's arm in the crook of his own elbow. At the same time, he brought the flat of one of his blades down onto Neji's trapped wrist. He didn't channel a burst of wind. He channeled a different kind of energy. A steady, oppressive pulse. Neji's eyes went wide with shock. The chakra flow to his hand was instantly and completely severed. Not blocked. It felt cauterized. His hand went limp, useless. A tool is only as good as the hand that wields it, Naruto said, his face inches from Neji's. Quote, but a master craftsman knows his tools inside and out. He twisted, using Neji's momentum against him, and threw the Hyuga prodigy to the ground. Before Neji could recover, Naruto was on him, one knee pinning his chest. The tip of a black blade resting a hair's breadth from his throat. The arena was utterly silent. No one could believe what they were seeing. The failure had not only beaten the genius. He had systematically taken him apart. From the stands, Sasuke's hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He was shaking, not with excitement, but with a cold, rising fury. That power, it wasn't the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi was wild, uncontrolled, a force of nature. This was different. This was precise, controlled. It was an art. It was a genius he couldn't match, a power he couldn't steal or copy with his Sharingan. And it was in the hands of the one person he'd always considered his inferior. The jealousy was a bitter, acidic taste in his mouth. Hinata, however, was breathless. Through her Byakugan, she saw the entire sequence in stunning detail. She saw that golden energy from Naruto's core surge into the blade, but it didn't just block Neji's Tenketsu. It had resonated with the chakra pathways themselves, vibrating at a frequency that momentarily deadened them without causing permanent damage. It was an act of profound control, almost surgical in its application. It was beautiful. It was a power she felt an inexplicable connection to, a secret language only she could see. Naruto looked down at the defeated Hyuga. Fate isn't in your eyes, he said, his voice low. It's in your hands. What you choose to build with them, or destroy. That's up to you. He stood up and deactivated the faint hum in his blades, their oppressive presence vanishing. He turned his back on Neji and began to walk away as Genma, shaking his head in disbelief, finally declared him the winner. The roar of the crowd was deafening, but it was cut short by a sudden, jarring explosion from the direction of the cage's box. Panic erupted like a contagion. White feathers began to drift down from the sky, and a wave of sleep-inducing chakra washed over the stands. The invasion had begun. Shinobi from the Sand and Sound villages appeared on the stadium walls. A massive, Three-headed snake was summoned in the middle of the arena. Chaos reigned. Naruto's head snapped up, his brief moment of victory evaporating. His eyes hardened. He looked not at the giant snake, but toward the stands where his friends were. He was a creator, a builder. And these invaders, these forces of destruction, were the antithesis of everything he was. Kakashi appeared beside him in a swirl of leaves, his expression grim. Things are about to get complicated. He glanced at the elders. Seating area and his single visible eye widened in alarm. Lord Bawako. Elder Homura, he whispered, his attention drawn to a commotion there. He flickered away. Naruto didn't have time to ask. He feel the vibrations of battle through the soles of his feet, could smell the acrid scent of explosive tags on the wind. This was a different kind of forge. And the whole village was the anvil. A moment later, Kakashi reappeared. His face pale. An Anbu elder, assassinated. Not by any jutsu I recognize. Just dead. He pointed. Go. Protect the others. Find Sasuke and Sakura. Naruto didn't need to be told twice. He leapt toward the stands, his black knives once again in his hands, gleaming under the troubled sky. The fire in his soul burned hot, no longer for creation, but for protection. His work, it seemed, was far from over. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes of Embers. The funeral was a somber affair under a sky the color of old iron. Rain fell in a fine, persistent mist, clinging to black mourning clothes and tracing silent paths down the faces of shinobi and civilians alike. Naruto stood slightly apart from the crowd, the scent of wet earth and sorrow thick in his throat. He watched the third Hokage's casket, draped in the white and red of the Hokage's office, and felt a hollow ache in his chest. The old man had been one of the few who had looked at him and seen a person, not a vessel. Now he was gone, another victim of the endless, grinding cycle of hatred and destruction. The peace that followed the failed invasion was fragile, a thin pane of glass over a chasm of tension. The village was wounded, walls were being rebuilt, lives were being mourned, and in the shadows, the political knives were being sharpened. Naruto could feel it in the way people looked at him. During the battle, his skills had been a welcome miracle. He had moved through the chaos not as a berserker, but as a battlefield artisan. He'd braced a collapsing gate with a web of instantly forged steel struts. Melted enemy kunai into useless slag before they reached their targets, and armed his fellow genin with shuriken that flew truer and hit harder than any standard-issue weapon. His actions had saved dozens of lives. But now, in the quiet aftermath, the awe was curdling into suspicion. The whispers followed him like his own shadow. The power he'd used wasn't in any textbook. It wasn't a known bloodline. It was alien, other, and in the shinobi world, what was not understood was feared. The summons came 2 days after the funeral. A pair of Anbu, their faces hidden behind blank porcelain masks, appeared in a silent flicker of movement in his small apartment. They didn't speak. One of them simply held out a formal scroll stamped with the seal of the Konoha Council. Naruto met their blank stares without flinching. He took the scroll, broke the seal, and read the stark, commanding script. He was to present himself before the village elders and the acting council heads. Effective immediately, he recognized the summons for what it was. Not an invitation, but a leash being tightened. He walked through the corridors of the Hokage Tower, the Anbu flanking him like silent specters. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and new paranoia. They didn't lead him to the Hokage's office, but down, to a windowless chamber in the tower's foundations. The council room was stark and intimidating. The walls were unadorned stone, meant to focus all attention on the long, dark wood table where Konoha's true power resided. At the head of the table sat Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Udatane, the third Hokage's old teammates. Their faces were etched with grief and grim resolve. But it was the man seated to their right who drew Naruto's attention. Danzo Shimura. His right eye was bandaged. His left was a black, unreadable chip of obsidian. He sat with a stillness that was more menacing than any overt threat, his hands concealed within his robes. A palpable aura of cold, calculating ambition radiated from him. Naruto Uzumaki, Kaharu began, her voice brittle. We have summoned you to discuss the unique abilities you demonstrated during the Chunin exams and the subsequent invasion. We are aware of the Jinchuriki's great power, Homura added, his tone severe. But what you displayed was something else entirely. A technique of creation that is not recorded in any of the village's archives. Naruto remained standing in the center of the room, the Anbu guards positioned by the door behind him. He kept his expression neutral, his hands loose at his sides. "It's not a technique," he said simply. Danzo's one visible eye narrowed. "Do not be coy, boy. Every jutsu is a technique. A series of steps that can be learned, replicated, and controlled. Konoha is facing an era of unprecedented instability. A power like yours, the ability to forge weapons from seemingly nothing, is a strategic asset of immeasurable value. It belongs to the village. It belongs to me," Naruto countered. His voice steady. There was no defiance in it, just a statement of fact. "An asset cannot have ownership," Danzo stated, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. "It can only have a purpose. And your purpose, like that of all shinobi, is to serve Konoha. You will provide our researchers with the principles of this jutsu. You will allow our finest smiths to study your methods. Your compliance is not a matter for debate." The air crackled with unspoken threats. Naruto could feel the killing intent emanating from the Anbu behind him, a faint pressure against his senses. This was the moment of choice. He could submit, become a tool in Danzo's armory, his divine spark reduced to a military resource. Or he could refuse, and be branded a threat, a rogue element to be contained or eliminated. He thought of the fire in his soul, the echo of a god's hammer, the sacred rhythm of creation. To hand that over, to let them dissect it and mechanize it, felt like a violation worse than death. It was a profanity. He slowly raised his hands, palms open. "You don't understand," he said, his gaze fixed on Danzo. "You think this is something I learned. Something I see, and write down on a scroll for you to copy." He closed his eyes for a second, reaching inward, not for the roaring furnace of the fox, but for the quiet, white-hot flame of his own essence. The golden light Hinata had seen now bled into the visible world. A faint, shimmering aura, like heat haze off a summer road, enveloped his hands. He focused. He reached out with his senses, feeling the composition of the room. The stone walls, the wood of the table, the cotton fibers of the elders' robes. And the metal, tiny, insignificant traces of it were everywhere. A loose rivet in the leg of Danzo's chair. A kunai shard embedded in the wall from some long-forgotten training accident. Microscopic flecks of iron in the very dust motes dancing in the air. He pulled. The effect was subtle at first, then dramatic. The loose rivet silently unscrewed itself. The kunai shard vibrated, then ripped itself free from the stone, trailing dust. The metallic particles in the air began to spiral, drawn toward Naruto's open palms. They coalesced into a swirling, incandescent cloud of shimmering dust. The council members stared, their stoic facades cracking with disbelief. Homura gasped. Kaharu leaned forward, her eyes wide. Danzo's visible eye was a pinpoint of focused intensity. The cloud of metal dust began to glow, first red, then a bright, searing orange. It wasn't just hot, it was emitting a light that seemed older and purer than mere fire. Naruto's hands moved in a delicate, shaping motion, never touching the molten globe of metal, but guiding it with his will. The globe elongated, flattened, folded in on itself in a series of impossibly rapid, silent motions. There was no hammer, no anvil, no quench. There was only will and fire. In less than 10 seconds, the light faded. A small, intricate object dropped from the air and landed with a soft tink on the stone floor. Silence. Naruto lowered his hands, the golden aura receding. He looked at the council, his expression unreadable. One of the Anbu guards, curiosity overriding his discipline, took a hesitant step forward and knelt to pick up the object. He held it up for the council to see. It was a perfect, miniature leaf, the symbol of their village. Every vein was rendered in exquisite detail. But it wasn't just a carving. The metal itself was layered in a pattern reminiscent of Damascus steel, shimmering with an inner light. It was a piece of master craftsmanship that would have taken a team of the world's best smiths months to create. And Naruto had forged it from scrap and dust in under a minute. "This power is not a tool of Konoha," Naruto said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. "It is not a jutsu. It is me. You cannot take it, you cannot copy it, and you cannot control it. You can only choose to stand with me, or to stand against me." He turned and walked toward the door. The Anbu guards, who had been poised to restrain him, now seemed frozen, their hands half raised, their masked faces betraying nothing of the shock they must have felt. They did not move to stop him. As he reached the door, Danzo's voice, cold and sharp as chipped ice, cut through the room. You have made a powerful enemy today, boy. Naruto paused, his hand on the doorframe. He didn't turn around. No, he said quietly. You have. He walked out, leaving the council in a silence as heavy as lead. He was halfway back to his apartment when he felt a new presence behind him. Not the cold, sterile chakra of Danzo's root agents, but something boisterous, familiar, and powerful. Quite a performance back there, kid. Had the old fossils sweating in their robes. Naruto turned to see Jiraiya, the legendary Sannin, leaning against a wall with a wide grin on his face. He was in his full regalia, the large scroll strapped to his back. His red Haori immaculate. Jiraiya-sensei, Naruto said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in days. What are you doing here? Heard my favorite student was making waves. Stirring up the hornet's nest, Jiraiya said, pushing off the wall. He fell into step beside Naruto, his expression turning serious. I also came because it's time we talked. About your father. Naruto's breath hitched. It was a topic that had always been a gaping void in his life, a question mark no one would answer. You knew him. Knew of him, Jiraiya corrected gently. Your mother, Kushina, told me. It was a complicated story. Not one for public record. They walked in silence for a moment, away from the main streets, toward the quiet solitude of the training grounds. The power you have, Jiraiya began. His voice low, it's not from the fox. I know you know that. It's from him. He wasn't a shinobi, Naruto. He wasn't even from this world. Not entirely. They stopped under the shade of a large oak tree. Jiraiya looked at Naruto, his gaze heavy with the weight of the secret he'd carried for years. Your father's name was Hephaestus. In the old tales, from a land beyond the sea, he was a god. The god of the forge, of craftsmen and blacksmiths. An outcast, a cripple, but a creator of wonders. The name meant nothing to Naruto, but the description, it resonated with a truth so deep it made his bones ache. A forge, a creator, an outcast. It was the story of his own life. A god. Naruto breathed, the word feeling strange and foreign on his tongue. Ang of immense power from another plane, Jiraiya clarified. How he met your mother is a long story for another time. But you are his son. A demigod. The fire you feel, the instinct to create, that is his blood in your veins. It was overwhelming, a revelation that should have shattered his perception of reality. But instead, Naruto felt a profound sense of clarity, as if a piece of his soul he never knew was missing had just clicked into place. Your mother knew your inheritance would make you a target, Jiraiya continued. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a scroll. It was scorched black, the edges burned away, the characters on it warped and unreadable. She created this for you before you were born. A message. But she sealed it with a power that only her child could unlock. Jiraiya held it out. She said it could only be opened by a true forge fire. Your fire, Naruto. Whatever she wanted to tell you, it's in there. Naruto took the scroll. It was warm to the touch, and he could feel a faint, complex web of Fuinjutsu, his mother's legacy, woven into its very fibers. For the first time, he held Samet, hing from both of his parents in his hands. A sealing scroll from the Uzumaki clan, meant to be opened by the fire of a smith god. His world had just become infinitely larger, and infinitely more dangerous. Danzo's political machinations seemed small, almost petty, in the face of this. Meanwhile, miles away in a hidden, technologically advanced bunker buried deep beneath the land of Earth, a different kind of council was in session. The chamber was lit by the cold, blue glow of chakra-reactive screens. At its center stood Kageyama, the purifier. He was a man in his prime, his face sharp and intelligent. His eyes holding the unwavering conviction of a zealot. An operative in gray tactical gear approached him, holding a data slate. Sir, the operation in Konoha was a success. Elder Bawako Sarutobi has been eliminated. The chaos of the invasion provided perfect cover. Our new weapon performed flawlessly. It severed the neural pathways using a focused chakra pulse. No jutsu residue, no witnesses. Good, Kageyama said, his voice devoid of emotion. He turned to a larger screen, which displayed a slow-motion analysis of Naruto's fight against Neji. A spectrograph broke down the emerald burst of wind chakra, labeling its energy signature as anomalous. Another graph tracked the golden energy flowing from Naruto's core into his blades. And the primary target, Kageyama asked, quote, the Jinchuriki. He's more than we anticipated, the operative admitted. The energy he's wielding is not demonic. Our deep-range sensors picked up a resonance. It's faint, but it matches the frequency. Patterns we've only seen at sites of ancient, pre-shinobi power. We are classifying it as a divine class anomaly. Kageyama stared at Naruto's image on the screen, his expression hardening. A demon inside, a god's power without. The boy is a nexus of existential threats. He is not a person, he is a catastrophe waiting to happen. The villages coddle these monsters, call them weapons. They fail to see that such power, by its very existence, invites conflict and destruction. It is a cancer. He turned to another operative. The recruitment of the Idate clan's last survivor is proceeding. Yes, sir. Asuma Sarutobi's former student, disillusioned with Konoha's leadership, blames the system for the death of his family. He's fast, skilled, and hungry for a cause. He has accepted our offer. Excellent, Kageyama said, clasping his hands behind his back. He looked at the map of the shinobi nations displayed on the main screen, dotted with markers indicating Jinchuriki and other power sources. The shinobi world believes its greatest threat comes from other villages. They are wrong. The true threat is anomalous power itself. Demons, gods, Jinchuriki, they are relics of a chaotic age that humanity must evolve beyond. His gaze settled on the blinking marker over Konoha. The Uzumaki boy is now priority 1. We will not attempt to capture him again. We will devise a method to neutralize his power at its source. We will purify the world of these false gods, one by one, until only the order of man remains. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Serpent's Shadow. The silence in the hospital room was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Sasuke sat on the edge of the bed, his back rigid, staring at the blank wall opposite him. The physical wounds from his brief, humiliating encounter with Itachi were healing. His body slowly knitting itself back together under the gentle hum of medical ninjutsu. But the real damage, the deep, ragged wound torn through his psyche, refused to close. It wasn't just the memory of his brother's overwhelming power, the casual way he had been dismissed, broken, and cast aside. It was the echo of Itachi's words, whispering of a power he lacked, a hatred he hadn't yet mastered. And layered over that was the memory of Naruto in the Chunin exams arena, his black knives pulsing with a light that had nothing to do with the demon fox. That was the true RCE of the poison now coursing through Sasuke's veins. Itachi's power was a known quantity, a goalpost, however distant. The Mangekyo Sharingan, he knew what he needed to achieve, even if the price was unthinkable. But Naruto's power, it was an aberration. It was a gift from a world Sasuke didn't know existed, a strength that couldn't be copied, learned, or stolen. It was innate. It was unfair. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. Naruto, standing over Neji, not with the wild fury of the Kyuubi, but with the calm, focused confidence of a master craftsman who knew the precise measure of his own strength. While Sasuke had spent his entire life clawing his way up a blood-soaked mountain, Naruto had simply been born at the summit. The realization was a cancer, eating away at his pride, his ambition, and his very sense of self. The door slid open. Sasuke didn't look up. He knew the chakra signature. You shouldn't be out of bed, Sakura said softly, her voice laced with a concerned th. It felt like sandpaper on his raw nerves. I'm fine, he clipped out, the words sharp and cold. Sasuke-kun, we're all worried about you. Kakashi-sensei, even Naruto. At the mention of his name, Sasuke's head snapped up. His Sharingan blazed to life, 3 tomo spinning in a vortex of crimson and black. Don't, he hissed, his voice dangerously low, say his name to me. Sakura flinched as if struck. The raw hatred in his eyes was terrifying. It wasn't the detached arrogance she was used to, it was something active, venomous. What has he ever done to you? She asked, her voice trembling. He exists, Sasuke snarled. He stands there with a power he didn't earn, a strength he doesn't deserve, while I have to fight for every scrap. He looked down at his own hands, clenching them into fists. These hands were meant to be instruments of vengeance, but they felt weak, useless. He's holding me back. Before Sakura could respond, a new presence flickered at the edge of his senses. 4 chakra signatures, alien and distorted, appeared on the hospital rooftop. They were powerful, their energy warped and unsettling. The Sound 4, Orochimaru's elite. They were here for him. He knew what they would offer. Power. The shortcut he craved. The means to crush Itachi, to reclaim his stolen honor. And, a voice in the back of his mind whispered, the strength to finally defy. Naively eclipse the divine blacksmith who walked beside him. The choice was no choice at all. It was an inevitability. By nightfall, he was gone. Naruto found out from a frantic, tear-streaked Sakura. He stood on the moonlit path leading out of Konoha, the weight of his friend's desperation settling on his shoulders. He looked at Shikamaru, Neji, Choji, and Kiba, the retrieval squad Shikamaru's quick thinking had assembled. He saw the grim determination in their eyes. They were shinobi on a mission. But for Naruto, this was something else. He wasn't trying to save Sasuke. He didn't believe in that kind of simplistic nonsense. You couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. He was trying to stop a friend from making a catastrophic, irreversible mistake. Sasuke wasn't just chasing power. He was trying to become a slave to it, to let Orochimaru rewrite his very being for the sake of a shortcut. And that, to a creator, to someone who believed that true strength was built, not given, was the ultimate sacrilege. I'll go on ahead, Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. The Sound 4 will use tricks, delay tactics. They'll try to separate you, pick you off one by one. I'll punch through, slow Sasuke down. You guys handle his bodyguards. That's not the plan, Naruto, Shikamaru said, a frown creasing his face. It's too reckless. It's the only way, Naruto replied, his blue eyes meeting Shikamaru's. There was no room for argument in his gaze. Buy me time. Before Shikamaru could protest further, Naruto was gone, a blur of motion disappearing into the dense forest. He moved with a ground-eating lope, his senses stretched to their limit. He could feel the faint trail of Sasuke's chakra, a discordant hum of anger and desperation. It was a scar on the tranquil energy of the forest. He found the first trap easily. A web of razor-sharp wires, nearly invisible in the moonlight. He didn't slow down. He drew one of his black knives and channeled a precise, controlled pulse of heat. The metal of the knife glowed cherry red for a split second. He sliced through the web, the wires melting into droplets of molten steel before they could even touch him. He didn't break stride. The battles that followed were a testament to Shikamaru's prediction. One by one, his friends peeled off to engage the Sound 4. Choji against the brutish Jirobo. Neji against the multi-limbed Kidomaru. Kiba against the two-headed Saken and Uken. Shikamaru against the cunning Tayuya. Each one was a sacrifice, a calculated move to clear his path. He felt the flare of their chakra as they engaged in their life or death struggles, and it fueled his urgency. He ran faster, his resolve hardening with every step. He finally caught up to Sasuke at the border of the Land of Fire. In a place where history and conflict had carved their sigils into the very landscape, the Valley of the End. 2 colossal statues, Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, loomed over a roaring waterfall. Their stone faces locked in an eternal, silent confrontation. It was a place of schism, a monument to a bond that had shattered the world. It was a fitting stage. Sasuke stood on Madara's head, his back to Naruto. The cursed seal on his neck pulsing with a malevolent purple energy. Black, flame-like markings snaked across one side of his body. His chakra felt immense, but tainted, borrowed. You came, Sasuke said, his voice raspy, distorted by the seal's power. He turned, and his face was a mask of cold fury. One of his Sharingan eyes was its normal crimson, but the sclera of the other was black, the iris a sickly yellow. I was hoping you would. I need to sever one last bond. This isn't you, Sasuke, Naruto said, landing on Hashirama's head, the spray from the waterfall misting around him. This power, it's a cage. Orochimaru is just using you. He is giving me what I need. Sasuke roared, the sound echoing across the valley. Power. The power to kill Itachi. Something you, with your mysterious, unearned gifts, could never understand. He lunged, crossing the expanse between the statues in a breathtaking burst of speed. He was faster, stronger than ever before. His fist, glowing with dark chakra, slammed into Naruto. Naruto was ready. He hadn't drawn his knives. Instead, he raised a simple, round shield that hadn't been there a moment before. He had forged it on the run, pulling trace metals from the soil and rock, shaping them into a tool for this exact moment. The shield was a dull, gunmetal gray, inscribed with a complex swirl of Uzumaki sealing formulas. Sasuke's fist hit the shield, and the impact was absorbed with a dull thud. The dark chakra of the cursed seal sizzled against the shield's surface, drawn into the seals and neutralized. Sasuke recoiled, his eyes wide with shock. What? I told you, this isn't a fight I want to win, Naruto said, his voice grim. It's a fight I need to end. He tossed the shield aside. It dissolved into metallic dust before it hit the water below. This time, he reached for something new. Not his knives. From pouches on his belt, he drew two weighted, intricately woven metal cords, each ending in a three-pronged grappling claw. He had designed them for this. Not weapons of destruction, but tools of restraint. The battle that followed was a clash of diametrically opposed philosophies. Sasuke fought to kill, using his enhanced speed and the raw power of the cursed seal. His fireball jutsu was larger, hotter, more destructive than ever. His Chidori shrieked like 1,000 angry birds, a spear of lightning meant to pierce and destroy. Naruto, in contrast, fought to subdue. He was a whirlwind of motion, using the weighted cords, his bolus, with preternatural skill. He deflected, parried, and redirected. The claws at the ends of the cords were not meant to wound, but to snag, to wrap, to immobilize. When Sasuke unleashed a massive fireball, Naruto swung one of the bolus in a wide arc, the metal glowing as he channeled his own chakra into it. The cord intercepted the fireball, and the Uzumaki seals etched into its very weave flared to life, not just blocking the jutsu, but unraveling it, causing the massive conflagration to collapse in on itself and dissipate into harmless heat. Sasuke stared in disbelief. His ultimate offensive jutsu had been undone as if it were a simple parlor trick. The rage and frustration boiled over. Fight me, he screamed, his voice raw. Stop playing with me and fight me with that real power of yours. The power you used on Neji. That's not what this is for, Naruto grunted, whipping the other bola to intercept a lightning-fast kick. I don't want to hurt you, you idiot. I want to stop you from throwing your life away. The fight raged across the valley, from the tops of the statues to the raging river below. It was a brutal, desperate ballet. Sasuke, empowered by the cursed seal, landed punishing blows. Naruto, relying on his superior tactics and his purpose-forged tools, absorbed and contained the onslaught. He took hits, his body aching with bruises, but he never retaliated with lethal force. He was a wall, an immovable object against Sasuke's irresistible force. From a high, concealed cliff overlooking the valley, two figures watched the conflict unfold. They wore the gray, high-tech tactical gear of the purifiers. One of them held a sophisticated scanner, its lens trained on the battle. The target is engaging the Uchiha, the spotter reported, his voice calm and professional, relayed through an encrypted comms channel. Subject's chakra output is astonishing. The raw, demonic energy of the Kyuubi is present, but it's heavily suppressed. The primary energy source is the divine anomaly. The feed was being relayed directly to Kageyama in his command bunker. He watched the two boys fight, his expression a mask of cold analysis. He saw Sasuke's borrowed power, a clear example of a dangerous element corrupting a shinobi. And he saw Naruto, wielding a power even more profound, a power that broke the established rules of their world. Note the subject's equipment, Kageyama instructed. Self-forged, hyperconductive materials infused with advanced fuinjutsu. His ability to neutralize ninjutsu is a primary threat. And look there, he pointed to a fluctuation on the spectrograph. When the Uchiha's cursed seal makes contact, the divine energy signature wavers. There's an incompatibility, A weakness. He filed the information away. Every piece of data brought him closer to a solution. Back in the valley, the battle was reaching its crescendo. Sasuke, driven to the brink of exhaustion and madness, unleashed the full power of the Cursed Seal Level 2. His skin turned a dark gray, his hair grew long and white, and grotesque. Hand-like wings sprouted from his back. His Chidori transformed, no longer a blade of pure white lightning, but a spear of jagged, crackling black energy. Naruto met the charge. The fox's red chakra finally boiled over, cloaking him in a bubbling, one-tailed shroud. It wasn't a choice he wanted to make, but Sasuke's attack was too powerful to contain otherwise. Rasengan versus Chidori, a sphere of pure, swirling blue chakra against a spear of corrupted black lightning. The two attacks met in the center of the valley, and the world exploded in a cataclysm of light and sound. A massive, black sphere of energy erupted, vaporizing the water, shattering the stone, and shaking the very foundations of the two great statues. When the light faded, Sasuke was standing. Naruto was on the ground, a gaping, cauterized wound in his shoulder where the Chidori had struck. The Kyuubi's cloak had absorbed the worst of it, but the force of the blow had knocked him unconscious. Sasuke stood over him, panting, the cursed markings receding from his body. He looked down at his friend, his rival. He had won. He had proven he was stronger. But the victory felt hollow, bitter. He hadn't defeated the calm, confident creator from the Chunin exams. He had only beaten the monster that lived inside him. Rain began to fall, mixing with the spray of the waterfall, washing the blood from the stone. Sasuke turned, and without a backward glance, walked away, disappearing into the woods, on the path to Orochimaru. He had severed the bond, but the cost was a piece of his own soul. Naruto was left alone in the rain, unconscious. His mission a failure. He hadn't lost a battle of strength. He had lost a battle for a friend's heart. And as the rain washed over him, he understood with a terrible, sinking clarity that there were some wounds that even the most divine of forges could never hope to mend. The loss was a cold, heavy weight in his spirit, a flaw in the steel of his resolve that would take a long time to hammer out. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Metal. The journey away from Konoha was a quiet one. Naruto sat at the prow of the small, unassuming merchant skiff Jiraiya had chartered, watching the coastline of the Land of Fire recede into a hazy green line. The Chidori wound in his shoulder had been healed, leaving behind only a faint, puckered scar, but the wound of his failure was a cold, hard knot in his gut. He had replayed the fight in the Valley of the End 1,000 times in his mind. Every move, every choice. He hadn't wanted to kill Sasuke, but he hadn't been able to stop him either. He had met his friend's destructive certainty with a restraining hand, and it had been knocked aside. Thinking you should have hit him harder. Jiraiya's voice came from behind him. The Sannin was leaning against the mast, his arms crossed, his usual boisterous energy subdued. No, Naruto said, not turning. Thinking I should have been smarter. Stronger. Something. He clenched his fists. His power. It felt borrowed, rotten. But it was still enough. Power is power, kid, Jiraiya said, moving to stand beside him, the sea breeze whipping through his long white hair. Where it comes from only matters to the person who has to pay the price. Sasuke made his choice. Now you have to make yours. What choice? Naruto asked, a bitter edge to his voice. Go back to the village where a council of old men wants to turn me into a living factory. Where my friends almost died for nothing. No, Jiraiya said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The choice to understand what you are. Danzo, Orochimaru, the Akatsuki, they're all circling you, and not just because of the fox. They can sense your other half, even if they don't know what it is. It's like a drop of blood in shark-infested waters. You can't hide. You can only become a strong enough swimmer that the sharks think twice before they bite. He pointed east, toward the open, churning sea. That's where we're going. To a place that was destroyed for the same reason you're being hunted, because it was too powerful and too different. Where? Home, Jiraiya said simply. Your mother's home. The land of whirlpools. Uzu. Quote. The journey took days. The calm coastal waters gave way to a roiling, unpredictable sea. The sky grew overcast, the air thick with salt and the ozone tang of an approaching storm. Jiraiya navigated by instinct and old sea charts, his jovial demeanor replaced by the quiet competence of a seasoned shinobi. He told Naruto stories of the Uzumaki clan, their fiery red hair, their indomitable life force, and their unparalleled mastery of fuinjutsu, the art of sealing. They were allies of Konoha, but never its subjects, Jiraiya explained over the howl of the wind. Their skill in sealing was so advanced, it was considered a strategic threat greater than any army. During the Second Great Shinobi War, the other nations decided they couldn't risk the Uzumaki siding against them. So they banded together, Iwa, Kiri, Kumo, and wiped them out. Konoha was too slow to help. Or maybe, he added, his voice low and grim, they were too scared to. The parallel was not lost on Naruto. Feared for a power others couldn't comprehend. Destroyed for it, they reached the outer edge of Uzu on the 5th day. The sea itself became a weapon. Massive, ship-swallowing whirlpools churned the ocean into a chaotic vortex, a natural, impassable defense. Jiraiya expertly guided the skiff through the treacherous currents, his hands sure on the tiller. But as they drew closer to the main island, a low, resonant hum vibrated through the hull of the boat. Naruto felt it in his teeth, in his bones. It was the hum of countless dormant seals, a vast, complex web of chakra, woven into the very bedrock of the island. And beneath that, something else. A call from deep within the earth. A song of iron and fire, of stone and potential. It was the voice of raw material, and it was singing to him. When the mists finally parted, the island was a breathtaking, tragic sight. Jagged black cliffs rose from the churning sea, topped with the skeletal remains of towers that scraped at the gray sky. A great, crumbling bridge connected the main island to a smaller, sheer-sided islet. It was a ruin, but it was a defiant one. Nature had begun to reclaim it, but the sheer power of the place resisted. The air itself felt thick, buzzing with contained energy. This is it, Jiraiya said, guiding the skiff toward a hidden cove. The Uzushiogakure that was. They spent the next few days exploring the silent, ghost-haunted city. Naruto walked through collapsed plazas and overgrown training grounds, his hand trailing along walls covered in intricate, spiraling seal work. He LD feel the lingering intent behind each one, seals of preservation, of defense, of power storage. It was his mother's art, and it felt as intuitive and familiar to him as the heat of his own inner forge. It was the other half of his soul. On the 3rd day, the pull of the earth led him to the heart of the city, to a vast, semi-subterranean chamber. It was a forge, but grander than any he could have imagined. A central hearth, large enough to roast a summons beast, was surrounded by anvils of a strange, obsidian-like material and quenching troughs the size of small ponds. Carved into the walls, the floor, the ceiling, were thousands of fuinjutsu formulas, all spiraling toward the central hearth. They were seals for heat amplification, for structural integrity, for imbuing metals with specific chakra natures. The heart of the maelstrom, Jiraiya breathed, looking around in awe. The Uzumaki were not just masters of sealing. They were master craftsmen. They sealed concepts, spirits, N-jutsu itself into their weapons and armor. This is where they did it. Naruto placed a hand on the cold, central anvil. The call he had felt was strongest here. Beneath the stone floor, his divine senses could perceive it. A rich vein of unique, impossibly dense metal. It was laced with the island's chaotic, swirling energy. He could feel its potential, the things it could become. A shield that did not just block, but consumed. An armor that did not just protect, but retaliated. He looked at Jiraiya, his eyes burning with a new fire, the gloom of his failure with Sasuke replaced by a creator's fervent inspiration. I need to work, he said. Hundreds of miles away, in a secluded, mist-shrouded forest in the land of fire, a forgotten shrine lay nestled amongst ancient cedar trees. The shrine was not large, but it was old, protected by a lineage of monk guardians and a series of powerful barrier seals. It was a quiet, sacred place. That quiet was shattered by the silent, efficient arrival of the purifiers. They moved like gray ghosts through the trees, their tactical gear absorbing the moonlight. No flashy jutsu, no wasted movement. A team of 4 deployed a device that emitted a low, thrumming frequency. The air shimmered, and the complex barrier seal that had protected the shrine for centuries sputtered and died, its chakra flow disrupted by the advanced technology. The 5 monk guardians, alerted by the failure of their seal, rushed out, their faces grim. They were capable shinobi, masters of their own temple style. They were also utterly outmatched. The purifiers attacked. One launched a volley of specialized senbon. They weren't designed to kill, but to disrupt. Where they struck, the monks' chakra coils seized up, their bodies racked with paralyzing spasms. Another purifier activated a device on his wrist, projecting a localized field that seemed to deaden the very air, making it thick and heavy, impossible to mold chakra in. The monks' attempts at jutsu fizzled into nothing. Kageyama watched from a nearby rise, his arms folded, his expression impassive. Beside him, an operative monitored a handheld scanner. The artifact is inside, sir. Energy signature confirmed. It's one of the keys, just as the archives described. Secure it, Kageyama ordered. Eliminate the guardians. Leave no trace. The fight was over in less than a minute. The purifiers were brutal, efficient, and left no openings. They moved to the shrine's inner sanctum. In the center of the chamber, resting on a pedestal, was a short, ceremonial blade, a tanto. Its scabbard and hilt were made of petrified wood, but the blade itself was forged from a single, unblemished piece of obsidian that seemed to drink the light, radiating a palpable cold. The lead operative reached for it, his gloved hand closing around the hilt. The moment he lifted it from the pedestal, a deep, earth-shaking tremor rolled through the region. A wave of unseen, malevolent energy washed out from the shrine. A ripple of pure darkness that traveled for miles in an instant. The trees in the forest groaned, their leaves curling and blackening at the edges. A faint, insidious whisper slithered into the minds of the purifier operatives, a promise of power over the chaos they so despised. They gritted their teeth, their high-tech helmets filtering out the worst of the psychic assault, but they felt it. The world had just become subtly, fundamentally more unstable. Kageyama felt it too, a cold dread that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a problem growing in magnitude. The artifact is a stabilizer for a much larger source of anomalous energy, he murmured, his analytical mind processing the new data. By removing it, we have destabilized the containment field. He looked at the obsidian tanto, now secured in a lead-lined, seal-inscribed case. No matter. The only way to achieve true stability is to dismantle the old, failed system entirely. All of it. Back in Uzu, Naruto worked for 3 days straight, fueled by the island's ambient energy and his own burning drive. Jiraiya watched, acting as his assistant, hauling ore and maintaining the perimeter. He was witnessing a miracle. Naruto was not just smithing. He was performing a symphony of creation. He reignited the heart of the maelstrom with his own forge fire, a column of pure, white-hot flame that roared to life with a god's power. He smelted the unique Uzu ore, guiding the molten metal with his will. As he hammered the glowing ingot on the obsidian anvil, he wasn't just shaping it. With each strike, he wove his chakra into the metal, integrating the complex fuinjutsu he now saw in his mind's eye as clearly as if they were written on a page. He was weaving the concept of sealing into the physical object, marrying his mother's art and his father's craft. Finally, he plunged the masterwork, a round, perfectly balanced shield, into the largest quenching trough. The water, drawn from the very heart of the maelstrom surrounding the island, flash-boiled into a monumental column of steam. When he pulled it out, it was complete. The shield was a work of savage beauty. Its surface was a mesmerizing, shifting pattern of dark grays and blacks, like a storm cloud trapped in metal. Etched across its face in lines of silver that seemed to glow with their own inner light was a spiraling Uzumaki seal of immense complexity. This was the aegis of the maelstrom. Exhausted but triumphant, Naruto felt he was now ready. He took his mother's scorched scroll, the one Jiraiya had given him, and walked to the roaring hearth. Jiraiya watched, his breath held. Naruto didn't throw the scroll in. He held it, focusing his will, drawing the forge's most intense, purest heat into his hand. He bathed the scroll in a fire that would have vaporized any normal object. But the scroll did not burn. The flames clung to it, absorbed by it. The charred outer layer began to flake away like ash, revealing the pristine parchment beneath. The ancient, powerful sealing formula his mother had placed on it flared with a brilliant, golden light, recognizing the unique signature of her son's divine fire. Then, the light faded, and the scroll lay open in his hands, Kushina Uzumaki's elegant, forceful handwriting filling the page. He began to read. My dearest Naruto, if you are reading this, it means you have unlocked your father's gift and found your way back to our home. There is so much I want to tell you, so much I wish I could say in person. I love you, my son. Never doubt that, but I do not have time for sentiment. The world is in more danger than anyone knows. The nine-tailed fox is a force of nature, but it is not the ultimate evil. It is merely a lesser monster, a symptom of a much greater sickness. There is a primordial entity, a being of chaos and oblivion the old gods called Amatsu Mikabashi. The star god of chaos. It was sealed away in an age before shinobi, before the sage of six paths. In a prison forged from the conceptual fabric of reality itself. That prison is failing. The prison is locked by a series of divine keys, artifacts of immense power scattered across the world, hidden and guarded. But the seal's greatest anchor was me. As the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and a descendant of the Uzumaki clan who helped forge the original prison, my life force was woven into the master seal. My death during your birth, during the fox's attack, was a catastrophic blow to the containment. I believe the attack was no accident. The star god's will has been leaking into the world for decades. Whispering to those who crave power, turning good men to evil, fanning the flames of war to weaken the seals. It promises power, but it pays its debts with madness and oblivion. Naruto, your dual heritage makes you the only one who can fix this. Your father's divine fire can reforge what has been broken. Your mother's blood gives you the knowledge to understand the seals. You are not a monster or a weapon. You are a guardian, a mender, a blacksmith for the very soul of the world. Find the keys. Protect them. Use your power to reinforce the Great Seal before it shatters completely. This is your legacy, my son, your purpose. Be strong, be brave, and know that I will always, always love you. Naruto finished reading, the scroll trembling in his hands. The weight of his mother's words settled over him. A burden heavier than any mountain. His personal struggles, his rivalry with Sasuke, the politics of Konoha, it all seemed impossibly small now. He looked up at Jiraiya, his blue eyes alight with a terrifying, newfound clarity. He held up the aegis of the maelstrom, no longer just a shield, but the first tool for a war he never knew he was meant to fight. Jiraiya-sensei, he said, his voice hard as tempered steel. Our training trip is over. We have a world to save. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Purifier's Gambit. The return to Konoha was heavy with a purpose that felt like an anchor in Naruto's soul. The sea air, which had tasted of freedom and discovery on the way to Uzu, now felt like the last breath before a deep dive into treacherous waters. He stood beside Jiraiya on the deck of a much faster, military-grade vessel, the aegis of the maelstrom strapped securely to his back. It hummed with a low, contained energy, a silent promise of the power he now wielded. His mother's scroll was seared into his memory. The star god of chaos. The failing seals. The divine keys. It was a war being fought in the shadows of their world, and he had just been made its unwilling general. You're quiet, Jiraiya observed, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he studied his student. The change in Naruto was profound. The last vestiges of the loudmouthed, attention-seeking boy had been burned away in the forge at Uzu, leaving behind a young man with the focused, somber eyes of a master craftsman staring at a world full of flaws that needed mending. No point in talking when there's work to be done, Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the approaching gates of his home. First, we warn the Hokage. Then, we find out where the keys are. We need to know what we're defending. His certainty was unnerving. Jiraiya had expected questions, fear, denial. Instead, he got a work plan. It was the pragmatism of a blacksmith, not the bravado of a hero. The problem was laid out. Now it was time to select the right tools for the job. Their reception at the gates was the first sign that something was wrong. The usual guards, Azumo and Katetsu, were absent. In their place stood a full squad of Chunin, their expressions tense, their armor scuffed with the dust of hard travel. They recognized Jiraiya immediately, but their eyes lingered on Naruto with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The village was on edge. Lord Jiraiya, welcome back, the squad leader said, his voice tight. Hokage-sama has been expecting you. The village is on level 2 alert. Alert, what happened? Jiraiya demanded. Border skirmishes with Iwagakure, the Chunin replied, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Their patrols have been getting aggressive. We've to double our presence along the entire northern frontier. Most of our Junin are deployed. Naruto and Jiraiya exchanged a look. It felt too convenient. A distraction. They found Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, in the tower, surrounded by a mountain of scrolls and intelligence reports. Her office smelled of stale sake and overwhelming stress. Shizune moved around her like a frantic satellite, trying to maintain some semblance of order. "You're back," Tsunade said, her voice gravelly with exhaustion. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Good. I could use a Sannin and a miracle worker right about now." She gestured to a map of the Land of Fire, dotted with red markers. "Iwa is making a power play, probing our defenses, trying to take advantage of our weakness after the Sand and Sound invasion. I've sent Kakashi, Guy, Asuma, and Kurenai's teams to reinforce the border. We're stretched thin." "This isn't Iwa," Naruto said flatly. The authority in his voice made Tsunade pause, her pen hovering over a report. "And what makes you say that, brat?" she asked, her eyebrow raised. "It's a feint," Naruto continued, his eyes tracing the lines on the map. "They're pulling our best shinobi away from the village. They're creating a vacuum. Someone wants Konoha empty." Jiraiya laid Kushina's scroll, now resealed, on the desk. "There's more going on than border disputes, Tsunade. A much older, much bigger threat is stirring. Naruto is at the center of it." Tsunade listened, her expression shifting from irritation to disbelief, and finally to a grudging, horrified acceptance as Jiraiya explained the truth of the Great Seal and Amatsu Mikabashi. The story was too insane not to be true. "So you're telling me," she said, rubbing her temples, "that while I'm trying to stop a war on the outside, there's a secret world-ending apocalypse brewing on the inside, and this kid is the only one who can fix it." "That about sums it up," Jiraiya confirmed. Before anyone could say more, a frantic sensor nin burst into the office, his face pale. "Hokage-sama, the main barrier. It's flickering." And all long-range communication just went dead. Naruto's head snapped up. His senses, honed by his divine connection to metal and energy, felt it a second later. A subtle, high-frequency vibration in the air. A technological sickness that was choking the village's chakra-based systems. "It's starting," he said, his voice a low growl. "They're here." He turned to Tsunade. "They're here for me." He was already moving, blurring past the shocked sensor nin and out of the office. He wasn't heading for the walls or the village gates. He was heading for his forge. For his sanctuary. They would know about it. They would see it as the heart of his power. He arrived at the crumbling Uzuma. He shrined to find he wasn't the only one who had sensed the wrongness in the air. Hinata Hyuga stood near the entrance, her Byakugan active, her posture radiating a quiet, fierce tension. "Naruto-kun," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I felt it. A strange, parasitic chakra. Not like ninjutsu. It's cold, mechanical. It's everywhere." "I know," he said, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. "They've sprung the trap." He placed a hand on the stone entrance to his forge. "Stay here. You're my eyes." Suddenly, from the shadows of the trees, 5 figures emerged. They moved with an eerie, synchronized silence, clad in gray tactical gear that seemed to absorb the dim evening light. Their faces were obscured by full-face helmets with emotionless, glowing blue visors. The purifiers. They didn't announce themselves. The one in the lead simply raised his arm, and a device on his wrist fired a projectile. It wasn't a kunai or a shuriken. It was a small, dart-like object. Court that hit the ground and immediately began emitting the same high-frequency pulse Naruto had sensed earlier. The air grew thick, heavy. Naruto felt the connection to the ambient energy around him sputter. They were deploying a chakra-jamming field. "Hinata, how many?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the approaching enemy. 12 squads of 5, she reported, her Byakugan eyes wide with the scale of the infiltration. "They're spread throughout the village, avoiding patrols, moving toward civilian centers, and here. They're boxing us in." The trap wasn't just for him. It was for the whole village. Hostages. Collateral damage. A way to force his surrender. There was no time for a conventional defense. No time to wait for Tsunade to rally the few shinobi left. This was his fight. He pressed his palm against the shrine wall, and a panel slid open, not to his forge, but to a hidden communications seal. He channeled a sliver of his chakra into it. Shikamaru, Ino, Choji, meet me at the base of the Hokage monument. Now, we're under attack. He then turned to the approaching purifiers, drawing his twin black knives. Hinata moved to stand beside him, falling into a defensive gentle fist stance. They thought he was cornered. They were wrong. He was standing at the threshold of his own armory. The battle that followed was short and brutal. The purifiers' technology was formidable. They fired concussive energy pulses from rifles that forced Naruto and Hinata back. Their movements were cold, precise, and calculated. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They attacked a blacksmith at his forge. With a roar, Naruto stomped his foot. The ground erupted, not with an earth-style jutsu, but with the raw materials beneath. He pulled on the iron-rich soil, the trace metals in the ancient stone foundations of the shrine. Spikes of unrefined, jagged metal tore out of the earth, forcing the purifiers to scatter. He didn't give them a moment. He drew on the fire in his soul, and the spikes glowed, then melted. Reforming in midair, he wasn't making swords. He didn't have the time. He was making shrapnel, a storm of razor-sharp metal shards, superheated and propelled by a gust of his wind nature chakra. Ripped through the air, the purifiers' armor held against most of it, but the sheer volume and velocity of the attack drove them back, their disciplined formation breaking into a scramble for cover. Let's go, Naruto yelled, grabbing Hinata's arm and pulling her toward the village center. They melted into the alleys and rooftops of Konoha. They met Shikamaru, Ino, and Choji at the designated spot. Shikamaru's face was a mask of grim concentration. This is bad, Naruto. Their movements are too coordinated. They know our patrol routes, our blind spots. This was planned for months. They're here for me, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the tension. They're using the village as leverage. We can't fight them head-on. Their tech neuters most ninjutsu. What a drag, Shikamaru sighed. But his eyes were already darting around, analyzing, processing. So we don't fight like shinobi. We fight like trappers. He looked at Naruto. Your ability. You can control metal, right? Not just create things. I can feel it, influence it, Naruto confirmed. Shikamaru's mind was already several steps ahead. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. Good. He turned to Ino. Link us. All of us. No talking. Just thought. He looked at Hinata. You're our eyes. Tell me where every single one of them is. He looked back to Naruto. You're the hammer. When I tell you where to strike, you bring the whole building down on them. Figuratively, he added quickly. Probably. Ino's clan symbol flashed across her eyes as she connected their minds. Suddenly, Naruto's world expanded. He could feel Shikamaru's strategic genius, a calm, intricate web of possibilities. He felt Ino's focused awareness, a communications hub. He felt Choji's steadfast loyalty. And through it all, a clear, precise stream of visual information from Hinata. 2 squads moving down 3rd Avenue. They are avoiding the main water lines, likely assuming they could be used as a conduit. Hinata's thoughts were clear and calm. Lazy, Shikamaru thought back. They're not thinking about the gas lines. To Naruto. The old district. The pipes are cast iron. All of them. Can you rupture them? Easily. Naruto replied in the mental network. Do it, Choji. Be ready to block the street. From his vantage point on a rooftop, Naruto focused. He reached out with his senses, down through the earth, and found the network of pipes. He didn't try to make them explode. That was too crude. He simply found the main valve regulators, ancient, rusted things no one had touched in 50 years. And with a focused application of will, he wrenched them all open. A geyser of pressurized gas erupted from a manhole cover in the path of the purifier squads. They recoiled, their helmets instantly registering the atmospheric hazard. Just as they turned to retreat, Choji, using his expansion jutsu, became a human boulder, completely blocking the alley behind them. They were trapped. A single spark would have incinerated them. They were forced to disengage, retreating to the rooftops. One by one, Shikamaru's traps, executed by Naruto's power and guided by Hinata's vision, began to dismount. The Purifiers, surgical infiltration. A squad moving across a bridge found the steel support cables suddenly twisting, coiling around their legs like metal snakes. Another found the metal grates the sewer system flying up to form an impenetrable cage around them. They weren't being defeated. They were being outmaneuvered, their technological advantage nullified by a strategy that turned their greatest asset, the predictable man-made environment, into a weapon against them. The leader of the invasion, watching the chaos unfold from a command post on the village wall, grunted in frustration. His squads were being herded, corralled. The boy wasn't just a powerhouse, he was a leader. That leader was Kageyama. He had anticipated resistance, but not this. Not this seamless, improvised fence that turned the village itself into a living organism. He had to change tactics. He had to force the confrontation. He left his command post and moved toward the one place he knew his target would be forced to defend. The memorial stone. Naruto felt his presence before Hinata spotted him. A single, powerful individual, moving with purpose through the chaos. He's alone, Hinata sent. At the memorial stone. He's waiting for you. It's a trap, Shikamaru warned instantly. I know, Naruto replied. But it's one I have to walk into. He broke from the group, leaving them to continue harassing the Purifier squads, and made his way to the clearing that housed the black granite stone. Kageyama stood before the monument, his helmet off, revealing the face of a man in his late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression of unwavering conviction. He watched Naruto approach, his posture relaxed, but radiating a dangerous intensity. Naruto Uzumaki, Kageyama said, his voice calm and even. You are a more formidable opponent than our data suggested. Get out of my village, Naruto said, his hands straying to the hilts of his knives. This village is a relic, Kageyama countered, gesturing to the names carved on the stone. It is a monument to a failed system. A system that creates weapons like you and the beast inside you, and then mourns the consequences when they inevitably go off. I am here to offer a permanent solution. There's nothing you can offer me. I'm not offering, I'm explaining, Kageyama said. I want you to understand why your existence cannot be tolerated. He raised a small device from his belt and activated it. A beam of pale blue light shot out, projecting a holographic image into the air between them. The image was of the Kyuubi's attack, 16 years ago. But it wasn't the view from the Hokage Monument, a battle of giants. It was from the ground, in a residential district. It was chaos, terror, and fire. A massive, building-sized paw-crushed homes. A civilian man and woman, Kageyama's parents, were vaporized by a stray blast from the demon's mouth. A younger Kageyama, barely a chunin, was holding the hand of his little sister, running for their lives. When a piece of shrapnel from a shinobi's counterattack, a massive toad's tonto, fell from the sky and, the image cut out. The silence was heavy. The shinobi who died that day are remembered as heroes. Kageyama said, his voice now a low, chilling whisper, filled with a grief so profound it had been forged into a diamond-hard ideology. But my family, they were just collateral damage in a war between monsters and the men who tried to control them. I saw the truth that day. The only path to lasting peace is the complete eradication of anomalous power. Jinchuriki, divine gifts like yours, they are a disease, and I am the cure. Naruto stared at the man, at the raw, undeniable pain in his eyes. This wasn't a monster. This was a man who had seen the absolute worst face of power and had sworn to destroy it, no matter the cost. He wasn't evil, he was just wrong. You think taking power away from everyone will make the world safe? Naruto asked, his own voice quiet. Power isn't the problem, it's what you do with it. You saw destruction, and all you can think to do is destroy the cause. I see the same thing, and I choose to build something to protect people from it. A naive sentiment, Kageyama scoffed. You cannot protect anyone. Your very existence invites greater threats. You are a lightning rod for disaster. He put his helmet back on. I see you will not be reasoned with. His objective to capture Naruto had clearly failed. But the mission wasn't a total loss. He had gathered invaluable data on Naruto's abilities and, most importantly, he had delivered his message. He had planted the seed of his ideology in his enemy's mind. With a single, sharp whistle, the purifier squads all across the village disengaged simultaneously. They deployed smoke screens and flashbangs, vanishing back into the shadows as efficiently as they had appeared. Kageyama himself took a step back, melting into the forest line. The attack was over. Naruto stood alone in front of the memorial stone, Kageyama's words and the ghost of his family's death hanging in the air. He had won. He had defended his village. But it was a hollow victory. He had looked his enemy in the eye and seen not a demon, but a man with a reason. A reason forged in the same fire that had created him. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A God's Flawed Creation. The air in Orochimaru's hideout was perpetually stale, tasting of antiseptic chemicals and decaying flesh. It was a place of grotesque science, where life was not nurtured but dismantled and reassembled into more useful, more monstrous forms. For Sasuke Uchiha, it was a crucible. He had grown stronger here, his body honed by grueling training and Orochimaru's twisted modifications. His Chidori could now be shaped into a dozen different forms. His fire jutsu could incinerate a small forest, and his Sharingan could perceive the subtle tells of a liar's heartbeat. He was becoming a perfect weapon. And he hated every second of it. He felt like a prized tool, polished and sharpened, but locked away in a drawer, waiting for his master's hand. Orochimaru dangled the promise of power over Itachi, but the Sanin's true interest was transparent. He didn't want Sasuke's success, he wanted his body. This wasn't a partnership, it was a slow, methodical process of possession. The power he was gaining felt hollow, secondhand. Just like the cursed seal that still pulsed with a malevolent energy on his neck. His frustration was a cold, hard stone in his gut. Every night, his dreams were a chaotic maelstrom of his brought. Hers condescending eyes and Naruto's confident smile. One was a power he had to surpass, the other a power he could never attain. Both were testaments to his own inadequacy. It was during a rare moment of solitude in an underground training cavern that they came for him. There was no flicker of jutsu, no sound of approach. One moment he was alone, the next, 4 figures in gray tactical gear were standing in the shadows. Their presence as cold and sterile as the hideout itself. Sasuke's hand instantly went to the hilt of his Kusanagi sword, his Sharingan flaring to life. Orochimaru's experiments are getting bolder, he sneered. A 5th figure stepped out of the darkness, this one without a helmet. It was Kageyama. His face was calm, his eyes holding an unnerving analytical clarity. We are not creations of that self-serving creature, Kageyama said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. We have come to offer you a purpose, Sasuke Uchiha. Not just power. I have a purpose, Sasuke retorted. And I have no interest in whatever cult you're selling. Your purpose is vengeance, Kageyama stated, not as a question, but as a fact. A worthy, but limited ambition. You seek to kill a man who possesses an overwhelming, unearned power. The Mangekyo Sharingan, a genetic lottery that gave him the strength to slaughter your entire clan. Does that sound familiar? Sasuke's blood ran cold. Kageyama's words struck a chord deep within him, resonating with the very core of his resentment toward Naruto. You hate Naruto Uzumaki, Kageyama continued, his voice a scalpel, dissecting Sasuke's soul. Not because he is your rival, but because he embodies the same injustice. He was gifted a divine power he did not earn. A power that makes a mockery of your sweat, your blood, your suffering. While you strive, he simply is. We understand this. We believe it is the fundamental sickness of your world. The purifiers raised their weapons, not in aggression, but in a display. They were rifles and devices of sleek, non-reflective metal, devoid of chakra channels or sealing scripts. The age of shinobi is ending, Kageyama declared. Jutsu, bloodlines, tailed beasts, gods, they are all chaotic variables in the equation of peace. They must be eliminated, purified. We seek to create a world of order, ruled by human will and intellect, not by the whims of demons and deities. A world where no one can ever again do to another family what Itachi Uchiha did to yours. The ideology was a perfect key, crafted to fit the exact shape of Sasuke's broken pride and burning hatred. His wasn't a lust for destruction like Orochimaru's. It was a quest for absolute, unassailable order. It was a mission to cleanse the world of the very unfairness that had defined his entire life. "What do you want from me?" Sasuke asked, his voice low, his hand still on his sword. Kageyama gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward and opened a long, lead-lined case. Inside, nestled on a bed of black foam, was the obsidian tanto they had stolen from the forest shrine. The blade seemed to absorb the cavern's dim light, radiating a coldness that was not of this world. "This is a key," Kageyama explained. "Forged in an age before chakra. Our research indicates it was designed as a regulator, a tool to sever connections to aberrant energy sources. We have refined its purpose." He looked directly at Sasuke. "Against a normal shinobi, it is merely a sharp piece of stone. But against a Jinchuriki, a user of sage mode, or a demigod who forges weapons with his own divine essence, it is the ultimate neutralizer." He was offering Sasuke not just a sword, but a concept. The power to unmake his rival's power. "Naruto Uzumaki is a threat to global stability," Kageyama said, his voice dropping. "His very existence is a beacon that will draw forth ancient horrors. He must be contained. You are the only one with the skill and the personal motivation to wield this tool effectively. Help us, Sasuke Uchiha. Help us purify the world of gods. And we, in turn, will give you the resources and the opportunity you need to deal with your brother." Sasuke looked at the black blade, then his own reflection in its polished surface. He saw his own eyes, spinning with the power of the Sharingan, another unearned gift, another chaotic variable. To accept this mission was a hypocrisy, but it was a hypocrisy he could live with if it meant bringing the world, and himself, to heel. It was a way to turn his own curse into the world's cure. "Where is he?" Sasuke asked. The forest was sick. Naruto knelt, running his fingers through a patch of grass. It was brittle and black, crumbling to ash at his touch. A few feet away, a stream ran sluggish and foul, the water the color of rust, a thin, oily film covering its surface. The air was heavy, and a profound silence had fallen over the area. No birdsong, no chittering of insects. Just the low moan of the wind through dying trees. "This is the third patch we've found this week," Jiraiya said, his face grim. He stood over the carcass of a wild boar. Its body was not wounded, but it was disturbingly decayed, as if it had died of old age in a matter of hours. "The corruption is spreading faster now." After Kageyama's attack, they had followed the intelligence Jiraiya's spy network had gathered, tracking a wave of unexplained plagues and ecological decay. It was the influence of Amatsu Mikabashi, seeping into the world like poison from a festering wound. Kushina's scroll had been right. Removing the key had accelerated the process. "It's like the life force is being leached out of the land itself," Naruto murmured. He could feel it. The vibrant energy of the earth, the hum of life he was usually so attuned to, was muted here, replaced by a cold, dead static. It made the fire in his own soul feel chilled. He felt a deep, instinctual revulsion. He was a creator, and this was the essence of uncreation. It was in T.'s deadened landscape that he felt the approaching chakra signature. It was a familiar, angry hornet's nest of energy, but it was sharper, colder, and more focused than he remembered. "Jiraiya-sensei," Naruto said, standing up, his hand going to the hilt of one of his black knives. "We've got company." Jiraiya's expression hardened. "So he finally found you." Sasuke stepped into the clearing, moving with a silent, predatory grace. He wore a simple dark blue shirt and black pants, no longer adorned with Orochimaru's purple rope belt. He looked leaner, harder. The cursed seal on his neck was gone, replaced by a faint tracery of scars. In his hand, he held the obsidian tanto. "Dobi," Sasuke said, his voice flat, devoid of the heated anger of their last encounter. "It was something colder, more resolute. Playing in the dirt with your master." "Sasuke," Naruto replied, his stance shifting into a ready crouch. "Whatever deal you made with Orochimaru, it's not too late to. I am no longer a pawn of that snake." Sasuke interrupted. "I have found a new purpose. A clearer path." He raised the obsidian blade. "I've come to remove you as a variable." The air crackled with tension. Jiraiya took a step forward. But Naruto held out an arm to stop him. "This is my fight. Sasuke smirked. Indeed, he attacked without warning. His speed was incredible, a significant leap from their last battle. He was a black blur. The obsidian Tonto aimed not at Naruto's heart, but at the aegis of the maelstrom strapped to his back. Naruto reacted on instinct, spinning and drawing his twin knives, moving to parry the blow. He expected the familiar clash of metal on metal. He was not prepared for what happened next. As the obsidian blade came close to his own divinely forged knives, the faint emerald hum of wind chakra they held simply vanished. The golden energy that flowed from his body into the metal sputtered and died. The blades in his hands suddenly felt like inert, dead chunks of steel. Sasuke's Tonto slid past his now useless parry and lightly tapped the surface of the aegis. FZZT. The complex, glowing silver seals on the shield flared violently for a second, then went dark. The hum of contained power it held, the very essence of the maelstrom he had sealed within it, was gone. The shield was still on his back, but it was just a heavy, useless piece of metal. Naruto leapt back, his mind reeling in absolute shock. He stared at his knives, then at the shield on his back. The connection, the lifeblood of his power that flowed between him and his creations, had been severed. He felt blind, muted. "What did you do?" he breathed, a genuine thread of fear in his voice. "This blade doesn't cut chakra," Sasuke explained, his voice laced with the cold satisfaction of a scholar proving a theory. "It cuts the link, the cord between the puppet and the puppeteer. All that divine power you were so proud of, your fancy forge and your magic tools, they're useless against me now. So what's left, Naruto? What are you without your unearned gift?" For the first time since he was a child, Naruto felt truly, utterly vulnerable. His entire fighting style, his very identity as a shinobi, had been rebuilt around his craft. Without it, he was. Sasuke didn't give him time to think. He pressed the attack, his taijutsu fluid and merciless. Naruto was forced into a desperate defense, using his now mundane knives to block and parry. The fight was a brutal reversal of their battle in the exams. Where Naruto had been precise and controlled, he was now clumsy and off balance. Where he had dismantled his opponent's style, his own was being systematically taken apart. Sasuke was relentless. Every time Naruto tried to channel chakra, to create a tool, to imbue his blades with even a sliver of power, the proximity of the obsidian Tonto snuffed it out. He was fighting in a null field that only affected him. A sharp kick sent him stumbling back. The obsidian blade flashed, and it sliced across his arm. It wasn't a deep cut, but where it touched, he felt the Kyuubi's chakra, which was always just under the surface, recoil as if it had touched poison. "Now you see," Sasuke said, advancing slowly. "This is true strength. Not a gift, but a solution. A tool that creates order by erasing the anomalies. You are the greatest anomaly of them all." Pain lanced through Naruto's arm. He was cornered, outmaneuvered, his greatest strength rendered impotent. He was left with only two choices: defeat, or a power he had sworn to himself he would never rely on again. The power of the demon. He looked at Sasuke's cold, resolute eyes. He saw no flicker of the friend he had once known. Only the unwavering conviction of Kageyama's ideology. He wasn't just fighting Sasuke anymore. He was fighting a philosophy. And he was losing. With a guttural roar that was more animal than human, he reached deep inside, past the silent divine forge, and tore open the cage. Red, bubbling chakra erupted from his body, cloaking him in a shroud of demonic energy. His eyes bled from blue to slitted red, his teeth elongated into fangs, his nails into claws. The first tail of the Kyuubi's power lashed out behind him. A wave of raw, untamed hatred. The deadening effect of Sasuke's blade was still there, but the sheer, overwhelming volume of the fox's chakra was too much to be completely nullified. It was like trying to snuff out a volcano with a wet blanket. The connection was damaged, frayed, but the raw power was so immense that it bled through regardless. The tide of the battle turned again. This wasn't a fight of skill or strategy anymore. It was a brawl. Naruto, driven by the fox's rage, attacked with a feral, unpredictable fury. He was no longer a craftsman, he was a catastrophe. He lunged, and his claws tore through the earth, sending sprays of rock and dirt at Sasuke. He was faster, stronger, his movements impossibly agile. Sasuke was forced back, his précis Say swordsmanship now a desperate defense against a whirlwind of claws and fury. This was the Naruto he had beaten in the valley. The monster. The demon. And it was a grim, validating testament to his new philosophy. See, he thought, his Sharingan tracking the frenzied movements. Strip away the divine gift, and this is all that's left. A mindless beast. The fight tore the dead forest apart, a May.'s traum of red chakra and black lightning. But it couldn't last. Naruto was burning through his reserves, his body screaming in protest under the strain of the Kyuubi's toxic power. He was losing himself to the rage. With a final, desperate charge, he formed a Rasengan in his demonic hand, the sphere a sinister, violet black. Sasuke met it with a black Chidori. The explosion was immense, leveling the remaining trees and blasting both of them apart. Naruto was thrown against a cliff face, the demonic shroud flickering and dying, leaving him battered, bleeding, and gasping for air. Sasuke landed on one knee, his shoulder dislocated, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had proven his point. He stood, popping his shoulder back into place with a sickening crunch. He looked at the fallen Naruto, then at the obsidian blade in his hand. "This is your last warning," Sasuke said, his voice strained. "Stay out of the way. The next time we meet, I will cut the source out of you for good." He turned and flickered away, disappearing into the shadows. Jiraiya rushed to Naruto's side, helping him to his feet. Naruto was shaking, his body and spirit bruised. He had been so confident in his power, in his craft. He had believed he could build a solution to any problem. But Sasuke, armed with a purpose-forged tool and an unshakable ideology, had stripped him bare, forcing him to become the very thing he'd been trying to transcend. He looked down at his hands, at the soot-stained fingers of a blacksmith. What good was it to be a divine creator, if a single, flawed creation of a mortal man could unmake him so completely? For the first time, he felt a sliver of doubt, a terrifying whisper in his soul that maybe, just maybe, Kageyama and Sasuke were right. Maybe his power was nothing but a curse. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Unbreakable Vow. The forge was cold. For the first time since Naruto had built it, the central hearth was nothing more than a pit of gray, lifeless ash. Air was still and carried a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain elevation of the remote safehouse Jiraiya had brought them to. It was the chill of a purpose extinguished. Naruto sat on a low stone ledge, his back to the entrance, staring at his creations. They lay on a leather hide atop the main anvil, looking like relics from a dead king's tomb. The aegis of the maelstrom, his twin trench knives, a dozen other smaller, perfect tools. Before, they had hummed with a latent power, a life force that resonated with his own. Now, they were just metal, beautifully shaped, masterfully crafted, but silent. Dead. Sasuke's obsidian blade had not just broken them, it had orphaned them, severing their connection to their creator. He picked up one of the knives. He could feel the memory of power within it, the faint, ghost-like pathways he had forged for his chakra to flow, but when he tried to push his own energy into it, he felt a jarring, painful rejection. It was like trying to force a key into the wrong lock. The link was gone. The divine spark that made his work unique had been snuffed out at the source. Jiraiya would come by every few hours, leaving food and water that Naruto rarely touched. He would watch the boy for a long moment, his expression a mixture of profound worry and pained helplessness, then leave him to his silence. He knew this wasn't a wound that could be healed by a pep talk or a new jutsu. It was a crisis of faith. Naruto had defined himself by his ability to create, to build. What was a blacksmith who could no longer imbue his own steel with a soul? On the third day of this self-imposed exile, a new presence arrived at the safe house. Naruto felt the flicker of her chakra, soft and hesitant, yet underpinned by a stubborn, unyielding warmth. He didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be here, Hinata," he said, his voice a low rasp. The footsteps behind him paused, then continued, soft on the stone floor, until she was standing just a few feet away. "Jiraiya-sama sent for me," she said quietly. Tsunade-sama was worried. "We all were." "There's nothing to worry about," he lied, his eyes still fixed on the dead metal. "And there's nothing you can do." He heard her take a small, steadying breath. "That's not true." He finally turned, a spark of irritation in his eyes. He expected to see her usual shy, flustered demeanor. Instead, he saw a quiet strength that surprised him. Her hands were clasped in front of her, but her stance was firm, her pale eyes clear and filled with a fierce, unwavering empathy. "You're wrong, Naruto-kun," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "Your power, the golden light that I see, it's a form of chakra. My Byakugan can see the flow of chakra. Perhaps if I looked, I could understand what that weapon did to you." Naruto stared at her. The idea was so simple, so direct, he hadn't even considered it. In his despair, he had seen his problem as a conceptual one, a spiritual defeat. She was approaching it like a medic, a diagnostician. She was offering to look at the wound itself. It was an intensely vulnerable proposition. To let her see the damage, the flaw in his very soul, felt like stripping himself bare. He hesitated, the instinct to hide his weakness warring with the desperate, flickering ember of hope her offer had ignited. He looked from her determined face to his useless tools, and the choice became clear. He had nothing left to lose. "Okay," he whispered, the word barely audible over the sigh of the wind outside. He sat cross-legged on the floor. Hinata knelt in front of him, her expression focused. "Professional. This might feel intrusive," she warned. "Just do it." She nodded, her hands forming a simple ram seal. Byakugan. The veins around her temples bulged, and her pale eyes took on a distant, penetrating focus. She looked at him, and he felt her gaze not on his skin, but through it. She was seeing the intricate, chaotic dance of the Kyuubi's red chakra sealed in his gut, a raging, violent storm. But she looked past it, deeper, to the steady, golden star of his own life force, the divine fire of his heritage. Her breath caught in her throat. "It's beautiful," she murmured, momentarily stunned by the sheer intensity of the golden light at his core. Then her eyes narrowed, her diagnostic gaze taking over. She traced the flow of that energy as it moved through his chakra network. "The pathways are clear," she reported, her voice a low, focused hum. "The golden energy, it flows from your center, up through your torso, down your arms, it's strong, perfectly healthy." She leaned closer, her gaze fixed on his hands. "But there, at the end, at your tenketsu points, it's not a blockage." Naruto held his breath, leaning on her every word. "It's more like a dam," she continued, her brow furrowed in concentration. "No, not a dam. A filter. A one-way valve. The weapon, it didn't destroy anything. It inscribed a kind of counter-frequency onto your network. Your divine energy can flow freely within you, but the moment it tries to exit your body to connect with an external object, like your knives, the frequency of Sasuke-kun's blade cancels it out. It creates a dead zone, just a few millimeters past your skin." He slowly began to understand. His power wasn't gone, it was just contained, trapped inside him. "It's like a cage," he murmured. "Exactly," she confirmed, her eyes still seeing the impossible. "The link isn't broken. It's being actively jammed at the point of transmission. The blade didn't leave a permanent wound, it left behind a seal. A highly advanced, parasitic seal that feeds on your own energy to sustain itself." The despair that had weighed on him for days began to recede, replaced by the familiar, analytical mind of a craftsman. A seal, a lock, and every lock had a key. "Can it be broken?" he asked, his voice now sharp with urgency. Hinata deactivated her Byakugan, her face pale from the strain. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not just empathy, but a shared spark of intellectual fire. "Breaking it might be impossible without the original weapon," she said thoughtfully. "It's too deeply integrated. But if the problem is that the energy can't get out." She trailed off, but Naruto was already there, his mind racing ahead, seizing the thread of the idea she had just offered. His eyes lit up with a brilliance that had been absent for days. The fire was returning. "Then I have to use it on the inside," he finished, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. The entire paradigm of his power shifted in that instant. He had always seen himself as the forge, and his creations as the weapons. But he had been thinking too small. If his divine fire couldn't be channeled into steel, he would have to channel it into the only medium it could still inhabit, his own flesh and blood. Instead of forging a sword, he said, his voice thrumming with excitement, "I have to forge my own body." He stood up and walked to the hearth, the cold, dead heart of the forge. He placed his palm against the soot-blackened stone. He closed his eyes, not reaching outward, but inward. He found the golden star at his core, the roaring fire of Hephaestus's blood, and instead of trying to push it out, he pulled it, circulated it, stoked it within the confines of his own chakra network. He focused the energy into his hand. His skin began to glow, first with a faint, warm light, then with an incandescent, white-hot intensity. The ash in the hearth stirred as if touched by a phantom wind. A single, orange ember at the very bottom, which had somehow clung to life for 3 days, suddenly glowed brighter. FWOOM. A column of brilliant, golden flame erupted from the hearth, roaring to life with a clean, pure sound, utterly different from the chaotic rage of the Kyuubi's power. The forge was no longer cold. It was alive, reborn. Naruto opened his eyes, staring at his own hand. It was no longer glowing. But he could feel the power thrumming just beneath the skin, a caged sun waiting to be unleashed. He looked at Hinata, his expression a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something deeper. Something he didn't have a name for yet. "Hinata," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." She simply nodded, a small, radiant smile on her face. In that moment, his space between them was charged with more than just a shared victory. It was the quiet, profound intimacy of two people who had looked upon the most vulnerable part of the other and, instead of flinching, had helped to make it whole again. He hadn't just gotten his power back, he had found a partner who could see and understand it in a way no one else ever could. He reached out and, without a second thought, gently took her hand. Her fingers were cool against his, which still radiated a faint warmth from the forge fire. He just held it for a moment, a silent, unbreakable vow of gratitude passing between them. The moment was interrupted by the heavy tread of footsteps. Jiraiya appeared in the doorway, a scroll in his hand. He stopped, taking in the scene, the roaring forge, the look on Naruto's face. The way he was holding Hinata's hand. A wide, knowing grin spread across his features. "Well," the Sannin boomed, shattering the quiet atmosphere. "Looks like the pity party's over." Naruto quickly dropped Hinata's hand, a faint blush rising to his cheeks, but the newfound confidence in his eyes didn't waver. "What is it, pervy sage?" Jiraiya's grin faded, replaced by a more serious expression. He held up the scroll. "News from my network. And it's not good. The ecological decay is spreading, but that's not the worst of it. The fear and instability are giving Danzo the political capital he needs." He unrolled the scroll on the anvil. "He's using the chaos as a pretext. He's invoked an old wartime protocol that gives root authority to secure village assets vital to national security. He's not just investigating the other Jinchuriki anymore, Naruto. He's actively trying to capture them. He's already made a move on the Eight Tails host, Killer Bee, in Kumo. It failed, but the message is clear." Naruto's eyes narrowed. While he had been wallowing in his own defeat, his enemies had been moving. Danzo, Sasuke, Kageyama, they were all different faces of the same problem. They were all men who believed that control, not trust, was the path to peace. They saw power as something to be taken, contained, and wielded over others. He, on the other hand, was a builder. He had just discovered a new way to build. He looked at his hands, then at the roaring, golden fire in his forge. He was no longer just an armorer of external weapons. He was the architect of an internal fortress. Sasuke had meant to disarm him, but instead, he had forced him to evolve, to become the very thing he forged. He had become the divine weapon. "Let Danzo make his moves," Naruto said, his voice calm and hard as tempered steel. "Let Sasuke hunt his ghosts. The world is getting sicker by the day. We have work to do." Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Siege of Iron. The desert wind of Sunagakur was a physical force. A constant, abrasive rasp of sand and heat. But today, it carried something else. The metallic tang of ozone and the scent of approaching war. The village hidden in the sand was a fortress carved from sandstone, a testament to survival in a brutal landscape. Now, it was under siege. Kageyama had made his move. The purifiers, in a display of terrifying scale, had surrounded the village. They were not trying to breach the walls in a traditional sense. Instead, they had deployed a network of massive, humming pylons in a perfect circle around the settlement. These devices, an escalation of the ones used in Konoha, created a dome of suppression. The air inside was thick and resistant to chakra molding. Soon as wind jutsu fizzled, their puppet masters found the IR connections to their wooden warriors sluggish and unreliable. The village's greatest strength, its shinobi, were being systematically neutralized before the first shot was even fired. Kageyama's goal was clear: Gaara, the Kazekage and Jinchuriki of the one-tailed Shukaku. He intended to capture him, not for power, but to cure him, to excise the beast and the anomalous power it represented. It was a siege of ideological purification. Gaara stood on the roof of the Kazekage tower, his arms crossed, his sand gourd on his back. His face was an impassive mask, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He could feel the oppressive weight of the dome, the way it tried to smother his connection to the desert's sand. He wouldn't let it. He was the Kazekage. He would fight for his people, even if he had to fight alone. They think they can suffocate us, Gaara said to his siblings, Kankuro and Tamari, who stood beside him, their faces grim. They are wrong. The desert is not so easily tamed. He raised his hands, and the sand around the village, from the dunes to the very dust in the streets, began to stir. It was a struggle, like moving through molasses, but the sand obeyed. A massive wave rose to meet the first assault of the purifiers, who were now advancing from the pylon perimeter, their sleek gray vehicles and disciplined infantry moving with mechanical precision. The battle began with a roar of engines and the hiss of sand. The purifiers used concussive energy weapons and chakra-disrupting grenades. Gaara countered with tidal waves of sand, crushing their vehicles and burying their soldiers. But for every wave he stopped, he felt the drain. The dome was sapping his strength. Temari's fan strikes were half as powerful, Kankuro's puppets were slow. The defenders were being ground down. It was then that the horizon to the east exploded. Not with jutsu, but with a colossal cloud of dust and the roar of something tearing through the desert at impossible speed. The Konoha relief force had arrived. At its head, leading the charge not from the back but from the very tip of the spear, was Naruto. He wasn't riding a summon or using a jutsu. He was running, his body a blur of motion. He was no longer the blacksmith who stood behind his creations. He was the creation. He hit the purifier's rear flank like a meteor. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. As he charged, the golden fire of his heritage flared within him, not radiating outward, but infusing his very being. His skin took on a faint, metallic sheen, hardening into a living armor that was tougher than any steel. A purifier squad turned, their rifles unleashing a volley of concussive blasts. Naruto didn't dodge. He ran straight through it. The blasts impacted his chest and shoulders, but instead of throwing him back, they seemed to slide off him, absorbed and redirected by the divine-tempered durability of his new form. He crashed into their line. His fists were like hammers falling on an anvil. He punched a purifier in the chest, and the impact was sickeningly loud, shattering the soldier's advanced armor and sending him flying 50 feet through the air. He wasn't just using strength. He was hitting them with the density and unyielding nature of the earth itself. Break their circle, Naruto roared, his voice amplified by his power. The Konoha forces behind him, Kakashi, Guy, Lee, Neji, and 100 others, poured into the breach he had created. Naruto zeroed in on the nearest suppression pylon. It was a 50-foot tower of black metal, humming with the energy that was choking Suna. It was guarded by a heavy weapons squad and an automated turret system. The turrets locked onto him, firing streams of high-caliber, armor-piercing rounds. Naruto raised his forearms, shielding his face. The bullets sparked and ricocheted off his skin, leaving only faint, silvery scratches that healed instantly as his internal forge retempered his flesh. He was a juggernaut. He reached the base of the pylon. He didn't try to disable it with a seal or a jutsu. He grabbed one of its thick support struts with both hands. The metal groaned. He channeled his inner fire, not to melt it, but to dominate it. To impose his will as the master of metal upon it. The pylon's hum turned into a screech. With a primal yell, he twisted. The massive steel structure buckled, then sheared at its base. He hefted the multi-ton tower over his head and threw it into the oncoming reinforcements, crushing 2 armored vehicles and scattering a platoon of soldiers. The dome over that section of the battlefield flickered and failed. Inside Suna, Gaara felt the pressure lift. His eyes widened. He saw the golden figure tearing through the enemy lines, a beacon of raw, physical power. He saw a kindred spirit. Someone who had taken the burden of their existence and forged it into a weapon of protection. Attack, Gaara commanded. The sand rose with renewed fury, no longer sluggish. A massive tsunami of desert engulfed the western flank of the purifiers, coordinated perfectly with Konoha's assault from the east. The tide of the battle turned. The purifiers, masters of control and suppression, were unprepared for the sheer chaotic force of the counterattack, and specifically, for the anomaly that was Naruto Uzumaki. He was a variable their technology couldn't account for, a man who was his own weapon. Immune to their chakra disruption because his power was now entirely internal, physical, and divine. The battle raged for hours. Naruto was everywhere. He was a one-man siege breaker. When a section of Suna's wall began to crumble under heavy fire, he didn't just defend it. He leapt to the breach, placed his hands on the broken sandstone, and channeled his power. He transmuted the very sand and stone, fusing it into a wall of solid, gleaming obsidian in seconds, stronger than it had ever been. He was repairing the fortress mid-battle, forging defenses on the fly. He saw Rock Lee, overwhelmed by a squad of elite close-quarters purifiers. Lee's taijutsu was incredible, but their armor was absorbing his blows. Naruto sprinted over, sliding between Lee and his attackers. As he moved, he reached into the pouch at his waist, pulling out a handful of raw iron pellets he always carried now. With a thought and a surge of his internal heat, he shaped them instantly. Not into complex weapons, but into dense, spiked bands of steel. He tossed them to Lee. Put them on. Strike hard. Lee caught them, his eyes shining. He snapped the bands onto his wrists and ankles. They were perfectly balanced, heavy enough to add devastating momentum to his strikes. Lee became a whirlwind of destruction, his armored blows now shattering the purifiers' defenses with ease. Naruto was no longer just fighting. He was commanding the battlefield through creation, empowering his allies and reshaping the environment. At the height of the chaos, Kageyama appeared. He emerged from his mobile command center, flanked by his elite guard and Sasuke Uchiha. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Kageyama looked at the carnage, at the failure of his perfect siege. His expression was one of cold, controlled fury. He looked at Naruto, who stood atop a pile of wrecked purifier machinery, glowing with golden power, covered in dust and the dents of 1,000 impacts. "You are a stubborn anomaly, Uzumaki," Kageyama called out, his voice amplified. "You persist in spreading your chaos. Do you not see? This war, this death, it is all because of powers like yours. This war is because of you." Naruto shouted back, "Because you're too afraid to let the world be what it is. You can't purify the world by destroying everything that makes it strong." Kageyama gestured to Sasuke. "Show him the futility of his resistance. End this." Sasuke stepped forward, the obsidian tanto in his hand. He looked different, hollower. The conviction in his eyes was brittle, maintained by sheer force of will. He looked at Naruto, seeing the transformation. The boy he had disarmed was gone. In his place was something far more formidable. Sasuke didn't speak. He flickered, appearing instantly in front of Naruto, the black blade slashing for his throat. It was the same move that had rendered Naruto powerless before. Naruto didn't dodge. He didn't try to parry with a weapon. He raised his bare arm. Clang. The sound was not of flesh being cut, but of a hammer striking an anvil. The obsidian blade, the ultimate nullifier, struck Naruto's hardened, divine-tempered skin and stopped. There was no chakra to cut, no external link to sever. The power was inside, woven into every cell, every fiber of his being. Sasuke's blade was now just a sharp rock against the living embodiment of a god's forge. Sasuke's eyes widened in genuine shock. Naruto didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sasuke's wrist with his other hand. His grip was like a vice of heated steel. He pulled Sasuke close, their faces inches apart. "You can't cut what I am, Sasuke," Naruto said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through Sasuke's bones. "I didn't just fix the break. I became the steel. He didn't strike his friend. Instead, he threw him. With a casual display of immense strength, he tossed Sasuke back toward Kageyama, a distance of over 100 feet. Sasuke landed on his feet, sliding through the sand, his composure shattered. The tool he had been given, the philosophy he had adopted, had failed against Naruto's evolution. Before Kageyama could react, the very air of the battlefield changed. The sky, already choked with dust, turned a sickening, bruised shade of purple. The temperature plummeted. A sensation of profound, existential wrongness washed over every living soul, stopping the battle in its tracks. Purifiers and shinobi alike froze, looking up in terror. Far in the distance, at the site of another hidden shrine, a pillar of pure, chaotic darkness erupted into the sky. It was one of the final seals. Broken not by the purifiers, but by the sheer, escalating pressure of the star god's return, fed by the conflict and despair Kageyama had sown. A shockwave of corrupted energy rolled over the desert. It was a psychic scream. Weaker minds on both sides buckled. Soldiers fell to their knees, clawing at their helmets, screaming in madness. The sand itself seemed to writhe, forming grotesque, grasping shapes. Amatsu Mikabashi was no longer just leaking through. It was breaching the world. Kageyama stared at the distant pillar of darkness, his face paling. This was not the ordered peace he sought. This was the ultimate, uncontrollable chaos he feared. His crusade to eliminate the lesser powers had only hastened the arrival of the Absolute One. Naruto felt the darkness trying to seep into his own mind. A cold whisper promising oblivion. He clenched his fists, his internal forge roaring to life, burning away the corruption with its pure, creative heat. He was a beacon of gold in a world turning purple and black. He looked at Gaara, who was also fighting the corruption, his sand forming a protective sphere around him and his siblings. He looked at Kageyama, who stood frozen in the realization of his colossal error. The siege of Suna was over. The war for the world had just begun. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. Heart of the Maelstrom. The land of iron was a nation of stark, snow-dusted peaks and the smell of cold steel. It was a neutral territory, a land of samurai, not shinobi, and its austere, fortress-like capital was the only place in the world that all 5 great shinobi nations felt safe, or, at least, equally unsafe, enough to meet. The 5-Cage Summit had been called in a state of unprecedented emergency. It wasn't about treaties or border disputes anymore. It was about survival. The shockwave of dark energy from the broken seal had been felt across the continent. It had left a psychic scar on everyone it touched and a tangible, creeping corruption that was now visible even to civilian eyes. Rivers ran black, patches of forest withered overnight, and a pervasive sense of dread had begun to settle over the elemental nations like a shroud. The world was sick, and for the first time in history, its leaders knew they were not the cause. Naruto traveled with Tsunade and Jiraiya, not as a Jinchuriki weapon to be guarded, but as a key delegate. He wore a simple, dark blue tunic, the aegis of the maelstrom strapped to his back. It was inert, its seals still dark, but he carried it as a symbol, a reminder of what had been broken and what he now intended to reforge. His own power was a quiet, thrumming presence beneath his skin. He didn't radiate energy. He was a contained force, his divine fire now tempered into a quiet, unwavering resolve. The summit chamber was a circular room, cold and imposing. At the center was a round table. The leaders of the 5 great villages sat, each with their 2 chosen bodyguards standing behind them. There was Gaara, the Cage, his usual impassivity now edged with the grim understanding of the threat they faced. Onoki, the wizened and stubborn Tsuchikage of Iwa, floated in his seat. Mei Terumi, the Mizukage of Kiri, watched the proceedings with a sharp, analytical gaze. And the volatile and immensely powerful Raikage of Kumo, had his massive arms crossed, his impatience a palpable force in the room. The samurai general, Mifune, mediated, his presence a calm, centering force in a room crackling with a century of accumulated distrust. The initial discussion was a predictable storm of accusation and denial. The Raikage, his village still reeling from the failed attempt on his brother, Killer B, accused Konoha of harboring a rogue element in Danzo. Onoki blamed Suna for weakness, allowing the purifiers to stage their siege. It was the old, familiar dance of shinobi politics, a pointless argument over who was to blame for the fire while the house burned down around them. Naruto listened in silence, his expression unreadable. He wasn't a politician. He was a craftsman. He saw the problem not in terms of blame, but in terms of structural failure. Their entire system was flawed, built on a foundation of mutual suspicion that was now crippling them in the face of a true, unifying threat. Finally, Tsunade slammed her hand on the table, cracking the thick wood. Enough. Kageyama and his purifiers are a symptom, not the disease. Danzo is a parasite, but he didn't create the sickness. Are you all so blind that you cannot see the real enemy? And what is that, Hokage? The Raikage boomed. A ghost story, a fairy tale of a star god that your Jinchuriki has conveniently uncovered. All eyes turned to Naruto. He felt the weight of their skepticism, their ingrained cynicism. They saw a boy, a weapon, not a solution. He stood up, and his movement was so calm and deliberate that it commanded the room's attention more effectively than any outburst. He didn't speak at first. He walked to the center of the room, near the table. He held out his hand, palm up. He focused, not on a grand display, but on a simple, undeniable act of creation. He drew upon his internal forge, and the air above his palm shimmered with a golden heat. From that shimmer, a single, perfect object materialized, forged from the trace metallic particles in the air and the divine fire in his soul. It was a small, intricately detailed metal crane, the symbol of peace. It glinted under the chamber's lights, a piece of impossible artistry created from nothing. He placed it gently on the table. My mother called it a Matsu Mikabashi, Naruto said, his voice quiet but resonant, cutting through the tension. It doesn't matter what you call it. The darkness that you all felt, the corruption that is poisoning your lands, that is the enemy. It is a being of pure chaos. It feeds on hatred, on fear, on the distrust that fills this very room. It wants to unmake the world. He looked at each cage in turn, his blue eyes holding an intensity that made them feel as though he were looking straight through their political masks to the leaders beneath. You're all right, he continued. Konoha has its traitors. Suna was attacked. Kumo has been targeted. Iwa has old grudges. But you're arguing about who gets to steer the ship while it's sinking. Kageyama's purifiers. They believe the only way to save the world is to destroy all great power. They're wrong. They're breaking the locks on a cage, thinking they're destroying the monster inside. They are only helping it escape. Bold words from a boy who was himself one of these great powers, Onoki grumbled, his ancient pride pricked. I am, Naruto agreed without hesitation. And I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust what you've seen with your own eyes. He looked at Gaara. You saw what my power can do. I didn't just fight. I rebuilt your walls. I armed your shinobi. He looked at the Raikage. Your brother, Killer Bee, fights with the power of the 8 tails. Danzo wanted to take that from him, to control it. The enemy we face wants to devour it. I want to arm it. To make it stronger. This was a new language for them. Power in their world was a finite resource to be hoarded, stolen, and controlled. Naruto spoke of it as something to be shared, to be given, to empower others. He placed his hands on the table. The Great Seal is failing. There are only a few keys left anchoring it to reality. We have to secure them. More than that, we have to fight the corruption itself. And we can't do it with our old jutsu and our old hatreds. Quote, he pushed the small metal crane toward the center of the table. I can create tools to fight this. Not just for Konoha. For all of you. Armor that can resist the corruption. Weapons that can cut through the shadows it creates. I am a blacksmith. And I am offering to be the armorer of this alliance. Silence. The cage stared at him, then at each other. His proposal was radical, unthinkable. To accept weapons forged by another village's Jinchuriki. To place their trust in a power they didn't understand. It went against every instinct they had. It was Gaara who broke the silence. I have seen the truth in his words, he said, his voice calm and steady. His power is not for conquest. It is for preservation. Tsunagakure will stand with him. Mei Terumi, the Mizukage, tapped a finger on the table, her expression thoughtful. The blood mists of my village's past were born from the kind of fear and control Naruto-kun speaks against. We have fought hard to move past that. It would be foolish to let that same fear blind us now. Kiri will join this alliance. The Raikage grunted, a sound like grinding stones. He looked at Naruto, his eyes narrowed. You arm my brother. You prove your strength is for the good of all. And if you betray us, I will personally tear you apart. Kumo is in. All eyes fell on Onoki. The old Tsuchikage stared at Naruto for a long, hard moment. His mind clearly weighing decades of animosity against Konoha against the terrifying, undeniable truth of the new threat. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It seems I am out of fashion. Very well, but I will be watching, boy. Do not disappoint us. For the first time in history, the 5 great shinobi nations were truly united. Not by a treaty signed under duress, but by a common enemy and a shared, desperate hope. The shinobi alliance was born. Miles away, in a root facility hidden deep beneath Konoha, the atmosphere was one of silent, efficient cruelty. Danzo Shimura stood before a restrained and heavily sedated Fu Yamanaka, one of his most skilled operatives. Fu's mind was a vault of secrets, and Danzo was about to crack it open. Tell me what you saw, Danzo commanded, his voice devoid of any emotion. When you made contact with the purifiers, communications. Fu's unfocused eyes stared at the ceiling. It was, not a network, Lord Danzo. It was a hive, a single, unifying ideology. They call themselves a cleansing fire. They seek purity, and their leader, Kageyama, his mind is a fortress of logic. He believes what he is doing is a moral imperative. He sees the entire shinobi system as a failed experiment in weaponizing children. He is recruiting the disillusioned, those who have lost faith. Suddenly, Fu's body went rigid. His teeth clenched. There is another layer. A shadow. Whispers beneath their cold logic. Promises of true order, born from absolute chaos. Danzo's single eye widened slightly. He had sensed it too. The purifiers were not the masters of their own house. They were being influenced, their rigid philosophy of order being subtly twisted by the very chaos they sought to destroy. Kageyama was becoming a pawn. An operative entered the chamber and bowed. Lord Danzo, the summit has concluded. Sources confirm the formation of a shinobi alliance. Naruto Uzumaki has been placed in a key strategic role. Danzo's hand clenched into a fist. The boy had sidestepped him again, this time on the world stage. His own plans of unifying the shinobi world under his control, using the Jinchuriki as his fist, were turning to dust. The world was uniting, but not under him. It was uniting around the very anomaly he sought to control. The boy is a fool, Danzo whispered to himself. He offers them gifts. He empowers them. He does not understand that true peace is not given. It is taken. It is enforced. He looked at the trembling Fu. A new, more dangerous plan began to form in his mind. If he could not control the Jinchuriki, perhaps he could control the chaos itself. In a lightless cavern somewhere in the land of rain, a different kind of alliance was fraying. Sasuke Uchiha stood before a flickering campfire. The obsidian tanto held loosely in his hand. Across from him, a purifier operative was making a report to a holographic projection of Kageyama. The target has evolved beyond our projections, the operative stated. The nullification weapon is ineffective against his current state. He has internalized the divine anomaly. Our models predict a direct confrontation would result in a 97% failure rate. Kageyama's holographic face was a mask of cold frustration. Then we change the target. We can no longer afford to focus on the symptoms. We must strike at the source. The remaining seals. Sasuke listened, his expression stony. The word, failure, echoed in his mind. He had failed. His perfect tool, his perfect philosophy, had shattered against Naruto's simple, infuriating refusal to break. He had offered Naruto a chance to see the logic of their cause, and in return, Naruto had shown him that true power wasn't a tool you held, it was what you were. He looked at the obsidian blade. It was a god's flawed creation. It was a weapon designed to enforce a specific outcome, but the world, and Naruto, had refused to conform. He was beginning to see the fatal flaw in Kageyama's logic. You couldn't create order by erasing variables. The variables would only evolve. He saw the pillar of dark energy in the desert. He had felt the horrifying wrongness of its psychic scream. Chi was a chaos that made the squabbles of shinobi seem like children's games. And Kageyama, in his obsessive quest for purity, was pointing all his weapons in the wrong direction. He was a pawn, just as he had been for Orochimaru. He had traded one cage for another, this one built of cold, unyielding logic instead of grotesque ambition. He was done being a pawn. He stood up, his movements fluid and silent. The purifier operative and the holographic Kageyama turned toward him. "My purpose is not aligned with yours any longer," Sasuke said, his voice quiet but absolute. "You seek to prune a diseased tree. I see now that the entire forest is on fire." Without another word, he turned his back on them and walked out of the cavern, into the perpetual reign of the cursed country. He didn't know where he was going. Not back to Konoha, not to Orochimaru. He was on a new path, a third path, illuminated only by the faint, cold light of his own desperate need for an answer. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a villain. He was an observer, a seeker, and soon, a variable that no one, not Kageyama, not Danzo, and not even Naruto, had accounted for. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. Forge of a New Dawn. The Spire of Heaven was a wound in the world. It was an ancient, shattered mountaintop that clawed at a sky of sickly violet and bruised gray, a place where the veil between realms had always been thin. Now, it was tearing open. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone and something ancient and rotten, like a tomb disturbed after millennia. The very rock seemed to writhe, corrupted by the raw, chaos. I see energy of Amatsu Mikabashi bleeding into the mortal plane. This was the location of the final, Master Seal. And it was here that the newly formed Shinobi Alliance made its stand. The armies of E5 great nations stood shoulder to shoulder on a vast, rocky plateau before the spire. Sand, leaf, cloud, stone, and mist banners whipped in the unnatural wind, a sight that would have been unthinkable only weeks ago. They were not 5 armies, they were one. Naruto stood at their head, flanked by the 5 cage. He was a contained storm, the golden fire of his heritage a quiet, steady warmth. Against the encroaching cold of the chaos, he looked at the faces of the shinobi before him, tense, fearful, but resolute. "Look around you," his voice rang out, not with a shout, but with the clear, carrying tone of a hammer striking true steel. "Look at the shinobi next to you. Yesterday, they might have been your enemy. Today, they are your shield. Today, we are not fighting for a village. We are fighting for the world. We are fighting for the right to build a future." He drew no weapon. He didn't need to. He clenched his fists, and his skin took on the faint, incandescent sheen of divinely tempered metal. The enemy in front of us is chaos. It will show you your worst fears. It will turn your own jutsu against you. Do not listen to its lies. Trust in the person next to you. Trust in the strength of our bond. That is a metal that chaos cannot break. He turned his gaze to the corrupted spire. "I am a blacksmith. My job is to fix what is broken. Your job is to buy me the time to do it. Hold the line." A single, unified roar answered him, a wave of sound that momentarily pushed back the oppressive silence of the corrupted land. Then, the battle began. The alliance charged. The ground erupted as the first wave of Amatsu Mikabashi's influence manifested. These weren't creatures of flesh and blood, but horrors of twisted earth and shadow, things that shambled and clawed and creamed with the voices of forgotten fears. The fighting was a maelstrom of color and energy against a tide of darkness. The rakeage, a blur of crackling blue lightning, tore through the shadow constructs, his sheer power a battering ram. Onoki, floating above the fray, unleashed his dust release, atomizing entire swaths of the enemy. Gaara's sand, now mixed with golden dust Naruto had forged for him to resist the corruption, rose in massive, shimmering waves, not just crushing the enemy but purifying the very ground they walked on. It was a symphony of destructive unity. But the tide of chaos was endless. For every shadow they destroyed, 2 more seemed to boil up from the poisoned earth. Then, the second army arrived. The purifiers descended from the ridges, their gray uniforms a stark contrast to the elemental fury of the battle. They moved with chilling precision, their energy rifles firing not at the shinobi, but at the larger chaos constructs. They were not allies. They were sanitizers, trying to sterilize a battlefield that had spiraled beyond their control. At their head was Kageyama, his face a mask of grim determination, a man trying to fix his monumental error by applying more of the same flawed logic. The battlefield devolved into a three-way war. Shinobi fought shadows, purifiers fought shadows, and when their paths crossed, shinobi fought purifiers. It was the ultimate embodiment of the chaos Amatsu Mikabashi craved. In the heart of the storm, Naruto moved. Now, he said, his voice a low command only his companions could hear. Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Hinata broke from the main force with him, cutting a path directly toward the base of the spire. The cage and the rest of the alliance were the anvil, holding the line. Naruto was the hammer, and he was about to strike. They reached the entrance to the spire, a crumbling archway that seemed to lead into a throat of pure darkness. "This is as far as we go," Jiraiya said, summoning Gamabunta in a massive cloud of smoke. The giant toad landed with a ground-shaking thud, ready to guard the entrance. "Get it done, kid." Tsunade cracked her knuckles, the seals on her forehead glowing. "Don't you dare fail." Naruto nodded, his expression deadly serious. He looked at Hinata. "Stay close. You're my eyes. I can't do this without you." She met his gaze, her own fear eclipsed by a fierce, protective resolve. "I'm with you, always." They plunged into the darkness. The inside of the spire was a non-Euclidean nightmare. Passageways twisted at impossible angles, and whispers slithered from the walls. At its heart was a vast, circular chamber. The air here was so cold it burned the lungs. In the center of the chamber floated a massive, crystalline sphere, as large as a house. It was the heart of the seal. And it was shattered. Great, dark cracks ran through its surface, and from these cracks, the raw energy of chaos bled into their world like black ink into water. "I see it," Hinata breathed, her Byakugan flaring to life. Her vision was a sea of screaming, violent energy, but she forced herself to focus, to trace the lines of power. The damage, it's not just physical. It's conceptual. The very idea of containment is broken. Quote, Naruto placed his palm on the cracked surface of the seal. It was colder than ice. He closed his eyes, extending his divine senses. He could feel it, the intricate, cosmic weave of the original seal, forged by beings of immense power. It was a masterpiece of conceptual smithing. And it was dying. "I can't just patch the holes," he murmured. "I have to reforge the entire concept." He took a deep breath. "Hinata, I need you to be my guide. Call out the weakest points, the most frayed threads in the pattern. I'm going to have to pour everything I am into this." He stepped back and braced himself. He reached inward, opening the floodgates of his internal forge. A torrent of pure, golden divine fire erupted from his body, enveloping him in a column of light so bright it cast the shadows of the chamber into sharp, terrified relief. He was no longer a man. He was a living forge, a star of creation in a universe of entropy. "The base," Hinata shouted over the roar of his power. Her Byakugan straining. "The foundational seal is unraveling." Naruto thrust his hands forward. A river of molten golden light flowed from his palms, not touching the crystal, but enveloping it. He wasn't layering new power on top of it. He was feeding his own divine essence into the original matrix, encouraging the broken patterns to remember their original shape. It was like trying to weld a ghost. The whispers in the chamber grew to a deafening roar, fighting him, trying to unmake his will. Outside, the battle raged. Kageyama saw the golden light erupting from the spire and knew what Naruto was attempting. He's trying to repair it. He yelled to his soldiers. Folly. The only way to stop the infection is to destroy the source. All units, concentrate your fire on the spire's entrance. The purifiers shifted their focus, their heavy weapons turning on Jiraiya and Tsunade. The two Sannin fought like legends, a whirlwind of toad oil, fire, and monstrously powerful punches, but the sheer, concentrated firepower was overwhelming. Kageyama himself broke through the line. He was a man possessed, his ideology the only thing holding his mind together against the psychic onslaught of the chaos. He charged into the spire, his chakra-dampening rifle in hand. He found Naruto in the central chamber, engulfed in a blinding aura, his body pouring its very life force into the Great Seal. Hinata stood nearby, her eyes wide, calling out instructions. Kageyama raised his rifle. He wasn't aiming at Naruto. He was aiming at the cracked, faltering crystal. It ends now, he hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. One clean cut. He never fired the shot. A black blur intercepted him, a flash of steel knocking the rifle from his hands. Sasuke Uchiha stood between Kageyama and the seal, the Sharingan in his eyes spinning, his Kusanagi blade held at the ready. "You," Kageyama snarled. "Traitor. You're a fool," Sasuke replied, his voice cold as the grave. "You would burn down the world to prove your point. I'm not here to save him." He jerked his head toward Naruto. "I'm here to stop you from making a mistake that no one can undo." Cage. Yama drew his own technologically advanced blade, and the two engaged in a furious, desperate duel amidst the swirling energies of the chamber. "The keystone, Naruto-kun." Hinata cried out, tears of strain streaming from her eyes. "It's about to shatter completely." Naruto heard her. He knew he didn't have the reserves left to reforge the entire thing. The drain was too great, his divine fire was dimming. He had to make a choice. He couldn't create new material. He had to use the only material he had left, himself. With a final, soul-shaking roar, he plunged his hands into his own pillar of light and pulled. He drew out the very essence of his divine heritage, the spark of Hephaestus's power that made him who he was, and hurled it into the keystone of the seal. It was an act of ultimate sacrifice, giving up a part of his own soul to mend the world. The crystal flared with a light that was not gold, but pure, brilliant white. The dark cracks sealed over, not with a patch, but with a seamless weld of conceptual energy. The roar of chaos was cut off, replaced by a profound, ringing silence. The oppressive cold vanished. The seal was whole. The golden aura around Naruto vanished. He fell to one knee, gasping. His body suddenly, terribly mortal. The divine sheen was gone from his skin. He was still strong, still a powerful shinobi, but the overwhelming, inexhaustible fire had been banked. He had given a piece of his godhood to the seal. Kageyama, seeing his chance, knocked Sasuke back and made a final, desperate lunge for the now stable seal. But he was met not by a blade, but by a fist. Naruto, moving on pure instinct and will, drove his fist into Kageyama's chest. It was not a blow of divine power, but of human conviction. Kageyama crumpled to the ground, his armor shattered, his ideology broken. Defeated not by God, but by the boy he had tried to erase. The battle outside had ended. With the source of the chaos cut off, its shadow constructs dissolved into dust. The purifiers, their leader defeated and their purpose rendered moot, surrendered in the face of the victorious but exhausted shinobi alliance. Sasuke looked at the weakened Naruto, then at the sealed crystal. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and vanished into the shadows from whence he came. His vigil had begun. Days later, Naruto and Hinata stood on the peak of the Hokage monument, looking out over a village that was scarred but whole. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue. The world felt quiet. Naruto's hand still felt the phantom ache of the power he had given away, but he felt no regret. "Is it gone?" Hinata asked softly, standing beside him. "No," Naruto said, his voice quiet. "It's imprisoned again. But the seal will always need a guardian." He looked at his own hands, the hands of a craftsman, a builder. "The world is broken, Hinata. There's still so much work to do." He turned and looked at her, and the morning sun caught the warmth in his eyes. The romance between them had never been a thing of grand declarations, but of quiet moments like this, of shared burdens and mutual understanding. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. This time, he didn't let go. The age of shinobi, with its endless wars and cycles of hatred, was over. A new age was dawning, an age that would require not just warriors, but builders. And at its heart stood a young man, part god, part man, who had learned that the greatest power was not in the weapons you forge for a war, but in the strength you find to build the peace that comes after. His work had just begun. Chapter 10 End.